We anticipate in the next 10 to 12 years, approximately 8 to 6 million Hispanics coming into the United States and 41 million Asians. You have been the majority minority for 400 years in this country. You have been the number 2 population for 400 years. You're going to get kicked out of being number 2. You're going to go down and become number 4. Now, common sense, even a third grade education will tell you, if you didn't get anything when you were number 2, you all jumped ahead of me, but anyway, you can guess what you're going to get when you become number 4.
President Biden, do you support reparations?
Well, I mean, since I haven't spoken on this chance, number one, the reason we're the country we are is because of immigration. We've been able to cherry pick the best from every single continent. The people who come here have determination, resilience. They are ready to stand up and work like the devil. We have 24 of every 100 children in our school today is Hispanic. The idea that we are going to walk away and not provide every opportunity for them is that not only stupid and immoral, but it's bad for America. They are the future of America.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest. It meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. This is what we are faced with. And this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington, in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
We are owed $104 trillion on the very low end, plus $735 billion recurring. This number does not include the cost of about 50 Black Wall Streets that were decimated, nor compound interest from 2017 when Sean D. Rochester's book, The Black Tax, was published, nor the cost of Black life, nor the cost of living increases, nor the war on drugs, nor the current day pandemic. The number I'm working with is for slavery, Jim Crow, and accrued ongoing systemic racism, oppression, and disadvantage in the country our ancestors built with their lives. Good morning, family. I see you, Miss Powell. Good morning, Danielle Whitten. And for those of you tuning in on Facebook and Twitter, good morning, and I thank you so very much for joining this extraordinary live, this extraordinary movement. It's going to be epic. I've been up all night crafting my comments for the top of the hour. We're going to be starting shortly. I'm going to be sharing the screen so you can see everything that's going on. You'll be able to hear me give my public comments. I think I finally figured it out after how many sessions. But anyway, fam, we are here. We are leaning in despite what the educated lames try and convince us that we should pull ourselves up by our bootless straps, and that this particular fight is being led by uneducated, poor hoteps. Yes, I'm calling folks out for trying to diminish the fact that we have been pulling ourselves up by our bootless straps forever. And yet we find ourselves on the bottom of the Titanic as the anchor of this country's capitalism. And Most of my comrades happen to be beautiful, brilliant, educated homeowners. So let me just dispel that myth as I've been fighting in the screw tube spaces to set the record straight with vloggers who I am now having to untether myself to because of some of the malicious things they say that sound like Black, white supremacist, racist tropes, akin to the monikers that we're shiftless, lazy, no good and no count, instead of admitting that we've been legislated to the bottom of this American Titanic as the anchor. This is from freedmen and Black immigrants alike. It really disheartens me. It pisses me off, quite frankly. And yeah, I have no time for it. So just to set the record straight, those of us who are losing sleep over reparations have it going on the most, and we're here to fight for the least of us. It's time for
Today is
day one, part
January
one.
27th,
Let me share the
2022,
screen
and the time is
of the California
9:02
Reparations Task
a.m.
Force. Sharing the
AB
screen now.
3121
Stand
Task
by.
Force meeting is now called to order. Good morning. My name is Camila Moore, and I am the chair of the task force. Before we begin, let us have the staff do a roll call for attendance to establish whether we have a quorum. Parliamentarian Johnson.
Yes, thank you. Chair Camila Moore,
Present.
Vice Chair Brown,
Present.
Member Bradford, Member Grills,
Present.
Member Holder,
Here.
Member Jones Sawyer, Member Lewis,
Present.
Member Tamaki,
Here.
Member Montgomery Stepp.
Here.
Madam Chair, there are 7 individuals present. A quorum is 5, and a quorum has been established.
Thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. Thank you, members of the task force and members of the public. Happy New Year. We are excited for this upcoming year. And as it relates to our efforts with this historic task force, I would like to remind the public that the public chat function is open. And while the public chat function is open, this is a friendly reminder to keep the engagement respectful. So from the review of the agenda, you can see that it is a full agenda. So to ensure that we complete it during the time allocated, we will need to make sure that we follow the timeline established. And of course, to keep us on time, we have Parliamentarian Dorothea Johnson. And so now, without further ado, we will go to public comment, which will last an hour. And again, people.
Period will be for 1 hour, and each person will have 3 minutes. Please be advised that in fairness to everyone, at the 3-minute mark, you may be politely interrupted and your microphone turned off. However, please know that there is a public comment period during each meeting and that the task force encourages everyone to participate. You may also submit written comments to the task force members at any time via email at reparationstaskforce@doj.ca.gov. To participate in public comment this morning, please use the raised hand function. Some of you may have already done this. Locate the button on the upper right-hand side of the screen. On the sidebar, you will see the shape of a hand. Click on the hand to prompt the feature. On our end, we will accept your hand. Then you will see a notification at the top of your screen to continue. You will have to click continue. You will then be elevated into the meeting as a presenter and automatically muted until it is your turn to speak. Please note that there's a 20-second delay between the attendee and the presenter mode. So please keep that in mind as you're being
I didn't get
promoted.
that. Try tapping above to edit. Sorry, I'm still not sure about that.
Sorry, excuse me. At the conclusion of your comment or at the 3-minute mark, you will be muted again and return back to the level of attendee. We will accept the raise hand function feature as they come in, and once the person in front of you is done speaking, Trini Hurtado, also with DOJ, will say your name to prompt you, indicating that you may begin. So Trini, can we have our first speaker, please?
Yes, our first speaker is Angela Nirvana. Angela, you've been unmuted. You may now begin.
After George Floyd was executed, corporations vowed to do better with respect to diversity, including tech. Instead of paying reparations directly deposited to freedmen, they poured billions of dollars into orgs like the BLM Global Federation, which raised $90 million the year of George Floyd's execution alone. Critics say the BLM have increasingly moved away from being a Black radical organizing hub and have become a mainstream philanthropic and political org run without democratic input from its earliest grassroots supporters. That's the grift. Corporate and government weaponizing our ongoing Holocaust to give everyone but freedmen the reparations we are long overdue. At the recent Freedmen's Bank Forum, Harris and Yellen spoke about our ongoing Holocaust. Then Mr. Luis Pastor spoke on his North Carolina credit union whose assets increased from $700 to $800 million, thanks to the government's $9 billion set aside. Now he'll issue mortgages to his people to take over the South, where our ancestors' blood and bones are buried from heinous U.S. chattel slavery. He accomplished this in 21 years. We've been here since before the country was formed, and I don't know of any freedman bank that boasts $800 million in assets, nor any freedman that can afford a mortgage here in California. They can barely afford rent. Ms. Boulder spoke on Boyle Heights and how the people were at risk of losing their homes to foreclosure. The population of Blacks in Boyle Heights is less than 1%, whites 67.45%. So in essence, she's speaking of yet another white wealth transfer at the Freedmen's Bank Forum, all of this money being exchanged in our name while we're constantly being told there's no money for freedmen reparations. As for the tech industry, whites and Asians dominate Silicon Valley as we bear witness to freedmen being gentrified out of San Francisco because the median home price is $1.3 million, the median rent $4,200. And if our median income is $40,000, even the 2% Black folks in Silicon Valley aren't even freedmen. It's African immigrants who descend from slave trader whose median income is double that of freedmen in the country our ancestors built with their lives. Ergo, the problem with flat Blackness. This data needs to be disaggregated akin to the Asians to unmask the failures of this government toward freedmen. And this is why our ongoing Holocaust should exclusively benefit freedmen in the form of reparations over multi-generations. We've been legislated to the bottom as the anchor of America's capitalism, and it makes my stomach turn to bear witness to these ethno-genocidal plans for freedmen at every branch of government. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Thank you, Ms. Nirvana, for your comments this morning. Trini, our next speaker, please.
Yes, the next speaker is Friday Jones. You have been unmuted. You may now speak.
Good morning, Task Force. I'm glad to be here with you again. I am
The next speaker is Friday Jones. You have been unmuted. You may now speak.
Good morning, Task Force. I'm glad to be here with you again. I am Friday Jones. My name is Kansa Jones Muhammad. I am a city commissioner for the Los Angeles Task Force as appointed by Mayor Garcetti, although my comments today are my own. I'm also the co-facilitator for the national organization NAASD, as well as the Los Angeles chapter, which is a member of CJEC. And we are all very much looking forward to the community engagement plan that we have ready for this year. I just wanted to point out two things. I sent you all a very lengthy email which transcribed Dean Erwin Chemerinsky, I always say his name wrong, Chemerinsky's interview with Politics in Black with me and Chad Brown. And I really want you all to take a minute to dive into that email testimony, because what he explained in terms of Proposition 209 and with regards to lineage being basically the cure for the legal hurdles with regards to the California Constitution and the federal Constitution is very important as you guys continue to discuss the beneficiary class and what that looks like, that you drill down into the level of specificity that's required. And although I understand that there are what I would consider like tiers in terms of time, and when you get into the prison complex, which was sort of a 60s to now thing, there may be a need to widen what the beneficiary class might look like. But I think it's very important that you make those tiers very well defined so that at no point in the future, the freedmen and the descendants of chattel slavery wind up having their beneficiary status diminished under the law, because everything is just sort of put together. So those are the considerations I want you all to have. I thank you so much for your work and your time. Have a great session today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Friday Jones, for your comments today. All right, Trini, our next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Kaya L. Jones. You've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Task Force. I am Kia Jones, and I am simply a citizen of California, have been for over 50 years. And I want to talk about what I see in terms of business and business ownership for freedmen in California. And as I look around and I see freedmen without business, and my heart breaks because it's clear that we've been excluded and marginalized from business ownership that will employ our own, being marginalized as business owners, being marginalized from obtaining small business loans. Had we not been excluded or marginalized by these institutions and pushed to be perpetual laborers and not owners, we would have financial resources to care for our own, hence the severe homelessness of freedmen in the state of California. I remember seeing charter buses of immigrant investors traveling through the Crenshaw district, taking a good look at us as though they were being shown their economic base and profit centers. This was in the 1990s. Let's fast forward. 85% of the businesses are owned by other groups that resemble the charter buses I saw. There are but a few Black-owned businesses employing Black citizens in our community. Why? This was a result of policies and cultures set forth by the state of California over the course of 50 years and many anti-Black governments. In addition to being excluded or intentionally sabotaged in business, our community has dealt with eminent domain separation from land ownership like Bruce's Beach, freeway construction, new transportation construction along the Crenshaw corridor, where few existing businesses are being threatened by big corporate investors. It seems as though the freedmen community is seen and used as the economic profit centers for every other group. Not only have we dealt with the lack of business ownership, but CIA-driven crack cocaine, mass incarceration that has broken families, thus our children being raised with minimal income, parenting, and protection. With 40 to 50 years of such policies against us, we are in need and deserving of repair. With proper resources, without interference and sabotage, we will establish our own communities and care for ourselves. We have done it before, we will do it again. We demand justice, we demand being made financially whole. After all, it is through our 100+ years of hard work and tax dollars, California is the great state it is today. Thank you, and I yield.
Well, Ms. Jones, thank you so much for your comments this morning. Trini, our next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Ernest. Ernest, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Task Force members. My name is Ernest Russell, and I'm calling on behalf of the Freedmen Agenda League of Michigan. My comments for today are to touch upon public health and discrimination in technology. I think as it relates to public health, America and its politicians at large has failed since the inception of slavery to assist the descendants of slaves or freedmen in the building of public health efforts for our communities that actually work. What we have seen from the government, though, is direct sabotage. And, that's via the de facto and the jury laws that you guys discussed in prior sessions. Ultimately, the effects of poverty, mass incarceration, the war on drugs, America's foster system, and many other systems are the result of a negligent government. And that intentionally looked the other way whenever Black progress was brought to the forefront of American politics. I urge the task force that as we are venturing with bringing, Black American prosperity to the forefront, that we do not allow any outside parties to steer us or derail us from the focus at hand. As it relates to discrimination in technology, a new study from the Dutch Bank shows that, Black Americans are experiencing what they call a racial tech gap, which could threaten their future ability to gain meaningful employment and grow wealth in a digitized economy. This is according to Dutch Bank's global technology strategist, Abjit Walia. She indicates that the staggering divide in numbers that we have found when it comes to race, and I say this is when it comes to race, but I'm someone who advocates for delineation and data disaggregation because I believe we can see a true picture of the Black American position. But as it relates to us, she states that the staggering divide in numbers basically puts Black American communities 10 years behind the white community for the last 20 years. She said, combine that with the rapid digitization and automation of the U.S. economy, that gap could eventually mean that the numbers of Black American workers could be disqualified or underprepared for 86% of the jobs in the U.S. by 2045. As we talk about reparations, we need to understand the generational impacts that need to be addressed. And I believe as we venture forward in the future, the year is 2022. We need to look back 100 years ago to 1920 and 1922 and really determine if the position of U.S. freedmen has changed, if any at all, when it comes to socioeconomic progress, in a system at large. I honestly believe that we're still the bottom caste, and I believe that discrimination in technology is a result of improper representation and the deliberate masking of true Black progress in America. With that being said, I would like to, request that the task force considers reviewing data as it is to determine the true positionality of Black Americans who descend from slavery. And I would also request that you guys consider supporting data disaggregation arguments that are being made across the country as a result to getting the true delineation.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you in the middle of your sentence. Thank you so much for your relevant comments today. All right, Trini, our next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Christopher Lodgson. You have been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes. Christopher? Mr. Lodgson?
Can you hear me now? Yes,
yes,
can you hear me?
Yes, continue, please.
Yes, it says I'm unmuted. So I'll start again. Thank you and good morning. Happy New Year. Chris Lodgson with the Coalition for Just and Equitable California, CJEC, giving the official comment for and on behalf of CJEC today. First, thank you for selecting us as an anchor organization. We are really excited about this amazing opportunity. Wanted to thank each and every single one of you. We've had very good first meetings with our anchor partners and our anchor facilitators. Big shout out to you, Dr. Grills, Mr. Michael Stoll, Mary Lee, Andre and Andrea at the communications firms, Alma, our facilitator. Big shout out to our anchor partners too, the Black Equity Collective, Black Power Network, African Black Coalition, COPE, I think that's Congregations Organized for Prophetic Engagement, the Repair Institute, the Othering and Belonging Institute. Hopefully I got all those names correct. Big shout out to everyone and looking forward to our listening sessions coming up as well. We have selected one of our listening sessions for June 19th, 2022. So we are very much looking forward to that. That's Juneteenth. And we are working on selecting our date and location for our other listening sessions. Looking very much forward to this process. It's been really, really good to start, and we're looking forward to working with the task force and with our anchor partners on some principles and some guidelines for listening sessions and ways to hold ourselves accountable to that, because we are accountable to our community. So wanted to start there. Also, you're going to be talking about community of eligibility today and hopefully throughout the rest of your conversations. Looking forward to this type of conversation and these types of conversations. They've been good so far, and we're looking forward to continuing them. We would like to put in a request though, since our team were a part of the people who actually negotiated that specific line on special consideration. I know you're going to hear from Secretary Weber on this, but we would like to request that we be allowed to also testify and help inform you about the meaning and intent behind that as we helped negotiate that. Also, you're also going to be talking about things you can do now, so-called low-hanging fruit. We have some ideas about low-hanging fruits. We think you can support AB 1604, specifically Section 4 of AB 1604, which finally asks California and requires, rather, California to disaggregate data for Black Americans who descend from U.S. slavery. Right now, there's nowhere in the state you can go and say, hey, give me some information about Black folks who descend from U.S. slavery. There's nowhere in the state that you can do that right now. That bill, that language would change that. You can support that now. You can also support ACA 3 to remove our horrible exception to and for involuntary servitude right now in our state constitution. I had a great opportunity recently to talk to Samuel Brown, one of the original authors of ACA 3. Brother did 24 years in prison, just came home. Let's welcome Samuel home right now. He wrote the legislation while he was in prison. We can support ACA 3 right now. Support for federal reparations also. You can also issue a support letter for federal reparations. And finally, you can also support a budget allocation to and for the Secretary of State's office, specifically to the Director of Archives, for help in supporting getting records and research ready for how people are going to document their eligibility for reparations. We had a great conversation with the Secretary of State a couple weeks back. That's something that she recommended that the task force do, and we agree with that. Finally, if I have a few more seconds.
Chris, I'm so sorry.
Okay,
I'm so sorry to cut you off.
No worries. I got most of it in. Thank you.
Great comments. Thank you. All right, Trini, our next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Leeda Torre. You have been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Yes, hello, good morning. Glad to be here again with you all. I am hoping to have two things happen. One of the things that we would like to support is a testimony from the International Tribunal, which is the spirit of Mandela, which happened from judges from across the world that talked about the genocide of our people. I'm hoping that they would be considered as a testimony in the upcoming hearings. I am also hoping that we can nominate the 48257 Black Box Project, which is basically from us here locally, which is the Richmond Progressive Alliance, the Afro Socialists, which is through the Democratic Socialists of America. If you know, they're almost in every state, mostly Blacks in that Afro Social group. The Western Movement Assembly, which deals with not only unions, but cooperatives and organizers. And we're hoping that this Black Box Project 48257 deals with the counties and the cities, just like people would say they buy their cookies from Girl Scouts. We're hoping to have a black box, which would really support our communities to tell their testimonies. It's great to have the history, but the people will support this case that we're up against for this state. And so here in Richmond, we are one of those 57 counties, one of those 482 cities. We hope that people will take the initiatives to sit out in front of grocery stores, Black bookstores, in the hood, in your neighborhoods, near HUD properties, get a table and have a Black box. We as organizers believe that solutions can support this, and we hope that you would support us to allow everyone else to join in recording, because this is what was needed when Martin Luther King went church to church and people came from any sector, if they were working class, if they were maids, if they were pastors, and if they were assemblymen. They came in as a united front to research and to take action together. So Black Bucks is what we would like to propose. And we hope that when you come for our Richmond listening project, we could talk more about that and support other cities, again, in the 57 counties to have a Black Box. Again, just asking people what is their issues that they've had, right? Some people have had from our city, the refinery, where they have generations of asthma. We, with the Red, Black, and Green New Deal, we're taking those notes, but we need this information to go to you all as a task force. It may be, again, Marin City, people that were desegregated because of the schools that were Sausalito, mostly white, and then the unfortunate piece with the Martin Luther King School is all Black, and the lawsuit was last year. These stories.
Ms. Torre, I am so sorry that your time is up. I hate to interrupt you.
Thank you.
For thought. Thank you so much for your comments today. All right, Trini, next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Harvey Allen Brody. You've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
So thank you and good morning. It's an absolute honor for me to have this opportunity to speak to you today. I'm convinced that this committee has the potential to make a difference in a cause that has been near and dear to my heart for as long as I can remember. In my 83 years, I have at times been doubtful that we could get to this date. And even with events being as dark as they are at this day, I believe that it is the moment that we can make reparations a reality. Words themselves will never be enough, but conversations are essential. As I have tried to talk about reparations with colleagues, friends, and family, I too often have been disappointed by their attitudes. Excuse me a sec. By their attitudes and by their interests. Following the lead of our African American brothers and sisters, white folks like me need to dig in and reach far and wide to help each other understand why this is the right thing to do and the right time to do it. Better late than never, and better now than later. One way I chose to participate in this conversation is through music. I wrote a song and created a video that speaks to this issue from my heart. And I hope that this song will resonate in a way that is useful to the cause. Dr. Grills, I'm excited to hear your report on community engagement. I'm sure it will provide a roadmap for building support as the task force moves forward. And members of the task force, I look forward to your continuing leadership and the opportunity to continue to have a conversation in whatever way it is most effective. Thanks again for the opportunity of presenting.
Thank you, Dr. Brody, for your comments today. Trini, our next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Charisse Crier. Charisse, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Good morning, task force members and community. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning. I'm calling in because I wanted to follow up on an email I sent to the task force at the end of December, addressing concerns with one of the expert witnesses, Professor Smith from Oregon State. And in all clarity, I did reach out to Professor Smith as well, but there was an article last month in the San Francisco Chronicle where Professor Smith said reparations might become more palatable if funding was used for measures to combat poverty, support job training, reduce mass incarceration, programs that aid descendants of slavery while crossing racial lines. And this gave me pause because basically what I felt she was saying is reparations are not palatable for descendants of American slavery unless we're including other groups. And I reject that notion personally. You know, a lot of times recently when Black organizations are talking about getting restorative justice for our community, we oftentimes include the Brown community. And I love my Latinx friends and family members, but that sentiment is not often reciprocated when we're talking about getting benefits for people or restorative justice, et cetera. So I would encourage the task force to take a look at some of the testimony and people who are giving expert witness testimony and kind of verify beforehand what their thoughts are for reparations, because this is something that can be used as a weapon or a sword in the future. Also, following up on Bruce's speech, an expert witness, Ms. Ward, provided testimony that she was representing the family of Bruce's Beach. However, in November, the county of LA said they were still seeking the closest living heir. So I would like the task force to please clarify who she was actually representing. Finally, there has been a discussion on tiers of reparations for Black folks in the state of California, and I personally reject that notion. If we're talking about tiers of reparations on the policy side, yes, but if we're talking about cash reparations, there's no need to dilute our claim. And I would encourage you to look at the lineage-based reparations per Professor Chemerinsky's suggestion. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker will be Ingo. I'm sorry if I messed up your name. You've been unmuted. You have 3 minutes.
Hello?
Yes, continue.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hello?
Yes, Mr. Ingo, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm assuming you guys can hear me. All right, my name is Ingo, and I've been born and raised in California. I just wanted to talk about the California's part in what I like to call soft genocide, the part in that, with the redlining, the non-hiring of Blacks all through California, the insertion of cocaine into our neighborhoods, the so-called war on drugs that was designed to put brothers and sisters in jail. I can just talk about my own personal treatment at one of these universities at California, where I sat in a class with about 3 other Blacks, and the teachers and the others acted like we didn't even exist. Then another piece of proof of that is the drop in the California Black population. In 1970, California's population was 40% white, 38% Hispanic, 17% Black, and 3% Asian. Today, it is 40% white, 40% Hispanic, 14% Asian, and only 6% Black. If this was an eagle or a bear, we'd be an endangered species. All right. Another short thing I'd like to say is I believe that with the reparations, we should also try to implement some kind of program where we create some kind of economic bubble for ourselves, like a triangle trade with Africa, e.g. like, maybe we can be the traders for Ghana with their cocoa, thus making an economic bubble like the Koreans do with, say, like their beauty supply line. And then also tech and business. That's something we need to also really and focus on. I myself am in tech, I'm a programmer. And business is just an essential that we all need anyway. That speaks for itself. I'm not going to go into that. And that's all I wanted to share today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingo, for your comments this morning. Trini, do we have any other speakers?
Yes, our next speaker is Chad Brown. You have been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello, members of the task force. It's still January, so I wish you all a happy new year. Good to see you. I hope that you all had a joyous, safe, and healthy holiday season with family. I wanted to call and just quickly reinforce and reiterate comments that were made by Chris Lodgson of CJEC. As you all know, I am also a member of CJEC. I am also a member of NAASD, the Los Angeles chapter. And I want to commend you for putting on today's agenda a discussion about the quote unquote low-hanging fruit, or what this task force can do in the interim as it deliberates to actually affect change and be a leader nationally in this reparations movement. So one of the things Chris mentioned was ACA 3, which is a constitutional amendment that would finally remove the abomination of a slavery loophole that appears in the state's constitution now. We have to understand that if we're going to be reparationists, we must also be abolitionists. And so ending and closing that slavery loophole, I think, is paramount in the duties and the responsibilities that this task force, that this commission has in front of them. So ACA 3, written again by Samuel Brown, introduced by Assemblymember Comlager, that bill could use your support, and I think your support could go a long way there. In addition to that, CJEC has been working on delineation, disaggregation language that we introduced initially as AB 105 in the Upward Mobility Act of 2021. That bill has been reintroduced in a new session as AB 1604, AB 1604, the Upward Mobility Act of 2022. Again, it is vitally important that we start disaggregating the data and looking specifically at the conditions of the descendant community so that we can craft solutions that are going to not only be targeted and reach that community, but that we can then measure the outcomes of those solutions. So AB 1604, 1604, again, I feel the task force can lead by lending your support to that piece of legislation. And finally, on the note of federal reparation, what I have been seeing, I've been involved now in reparations advocacy for over 3 years. And what I've been seeing is that there is a real disconnect between the federal effort and what is the grassroots or the activist effort. We have so far seen the federal effort stall and is resting on the laurels of an HR 40 bill, which we have heard from our experts, Dr. William Sandy Darity, John Tatsyeshi, who led the redress movement, and Dean Erwin Chemerinsky with his comments. And HR 40 is a woefully insufficient and substandard and flawed bill. We need this task force to step out front and lead from California to not only show or send a clarion call to the federal government that reparations are due and the federal government is the culpable party, but also to recognize that the piece of legislation that is currently in the House that is gaining support is flawed and will not lead us to the ultimate goal of reparations. Yes, Aisha, I know I'm over time. I know I'm over time. So I will stop there. Please, everyone, have a great meeting today. I look forward to listening.
Thank you. All right, Trini, next speaker.
We do have a speaker in the waiting area. Mr. Sadler, if you could press the continue button so that you can participate. Okay. Okay, it's just a few minutes until they get over. They just clicked on their buttons again. The next speaker is Robert Reed. Mr. Reed, you've been unmuted. You may now speak. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, can you hear?
Yes, please continue.
Okay, so first of all, let me start by saying hello. Hello to everyone on the panel, and also in the chat, I saw a lot of really good comments, and I kind of just wanted to touch on one where we have an organization who really wants to be a part of all things that is reparations, and I don't necessarily think that they have the best intentions in mind, and that is in Cobra, led by Cam Howard. They have really some very problematic ideas about what they would like to see reparations look like. And it's very Pan-African in form. And I don't think that that's what the people want. And I would really ask that the commission listen to the people and not these legacy organizations that do not have the best interest of Black people in mind. We had somebody just speak on HR 40 and the problems with the bill. A lot of those problems come from in COBRA and people who are affiliated with that organization, edits that they made with the bill. And so I would really, really just ask that the commission keep in mind that, if we're doing this for the people, then the people have to speak. And if the people are saying no, keep in COBRA and all of their affiliates away from anything that is reparations minded, just keep them away and really take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert Reed, for your comments this morning. Trini?
Okay, I have one person, Mike Sadler. If you could press it, there he is. Okay, Mr. Sadler, you have been unmuted. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, yeah, my name's Mike Sadler of the Black Business Company. We work on digital visibility in terms of search engine results for Black people online and Black ally businesses. The one comment, it's my first meeting joining, so really appreciate everything that's going on. The one comment I think that we should highlight is that, especially on this day where we want to highlight discrimination technologies, to make sure that we involve the digital technology best practices into how we sort of conduct these meetings. I think the visibility of the task force is low, and I think that, even doing things like live streaming to YouTube or doing small digital marketing campaigns, I'm not sure what the budget is like, but it really doesn't take much to go a long way. And as somebody who's done award-winning campaigns for Sony and Amazon and A24 and what have you, I can tell you that it really doesn't take much to generate awareness on such an important issue. So I'll spend most of the day as a listener, just soaking it all up. But I do want to highlight that it's very important for us to get the word out there about this. Otherwise, I have concerns that we may be doomed to fail because we may be unable to curry public support. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sadler, for those relevant comments. Trini, do you have
he was our last commenter. There is no one else in the queue right now.
Okay, Chair Moore, it's 9:43, so we have about 25 minutes for more commenters, but I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you both for that. So we'll go to the next action item, which is the approval of the December meeting minutes, with the caveat that, of course, members of the public can continue to call in between now and 10 a.m., and we will receive their calls before we go to the following agenda item, which is our first witness panel of the year. So without further ado, we will go to the action item, approval of the meeting minutes. So there's a bit of feedback, so if folks can just mute their mics for this action item, approval of December meeting minutes. So the December meeting minutes were provided in our meeting materials, and I know we all have had a chance to review them. So I will put a motion on the floor, and I move to approve the December meeting minutes as presented. Is there a second?
I second.
It has been properly moved and seconded to approve the December meeting minutes as presented. Is there any discussion on the matter? Hearing no discussion, I will move to, oh, sorry, Member Grills, I see your hand. You're recognized.
I just had two quick edit comments on page 12. I believe it is. Oh Lord, there's a typo on the page. It's page 6 of the, not the page count in the document, but the page. If you're looking at the counter for the PDF file, and there's a word that's incorrect at the bottom of a paragraph. It says dine, and I'm not sure what the word should be, but it's not dine. And then on page 14, there's a paragraph that talks about the backlog on inspections required for Section 8, and I believe there's a word missing in that sentence. There should be Black people find themselves shelter, and I think it's without shelter. So those are just two quick edit comments.
Thank you for that. Is there any other discussion on the minutes? Okay, so what I'll do now is I'll actually withdraw my motion and I'll do another motion, and I'll move to approve the meeting minutes as amended, recognizing Cheryl Grill's edits to the meeting minutes. Is there a second?
Second. If I can second my own edit.
It has been properly moved and seconded to approve the meeting minutes as amended by Member Grill's comments. Is there any discussion on the matter? Hearing no further discussion, I will now turn to Parliamentarian Johnson, excuse me, so that a roll call vote will be established for this motion. Parliamentarian Johnson?
Yes, thank you. I will call the roll call for the vote to approve the minutes as amended. Chair Moore?
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown? Member Bradford? Member Grills?
Aye.
Member Holder?
Aye.
Member Jones Sawyer? Member Lewis?
Aye.
Member Tamaki?
Aye.
Member Montgomery Stepp?
Aye.
There are 6 members present and voting.
Ms. Brown, aye.
Okay, I'm sorry, Vice Chair Brown, what was your vote again?
Aye.
Thank you. There are 7 members voting. There are 7 ayes, 0 nays, and the ayes, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, did you hear the vote?
You said 7 ayes, 0 nays.
7 ayes, 0 nays.
Yes, thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. The vote was 7 ayes and 0 nays. The ayes have it and the minutes are approved as corrected. We will now return back to the first agenda item, which is public comment. I believe there are 2 more speakers in the queue. Again, as a reminder, we have until 10:10 a.m. for this particular section of the agenda. So for members of the public, feel free to call in and you have 3 minutes to speak and we will hear you. So I will turn back to Ms. Martin-Walton and Ms. Hurtado.
Okay, our next speaker is Cash Gaines. Mr. Gaines, you've been unmuted. You may now speak. You have 3 minutes.
Check, check. Yeah, peace to the panel and to Don Tamaki, a deep bow. First, I'd like to say, since we're talking about technology, and I'm gonna speak a little bit quickly, no disrespect to the panel. I know you guys have by 2023 to suggest reparations proposals. Y'all know I mentioned earlier 40 acres and a Tesla, right? That our land as well as an update to the mule is necessary for us to have true autonomy. think of it a little bit simplified as 40 acres and an electric vehicle, because we know that the EV tax credit that the government funds pays up to $7,500 for any first-time buyer for an electric vehicle, which is helping to sell vehicles. So I wanted to call in today to mention two things: that there's a Black-owned electric vehicle company we can support instead, should people want to support them. That's called MIMS Motors, MIMS Motors USA. Although based in Detroit, I definitely believe there's someone who we should support as far as fulfilling the claim for electric vehicles for Black Americans in California. Again, I have to reiterate, Gavin Newsom said by 2035, gasoline vehicles will be taxed and you can't even sell them in California. So we should have our people living in the future. As well, there's a lady named Katie Porter of Irvine who says that she's trying to get us off of oil companies, oil executives using government land, not even to drill oil. They have 13 million acres of land that they're not drilling oil with. We can use her to reclaim that land and move it to what I'd like to suggest today: Black Americans becoming the solar generation. Black Americans becoming the melanin of America by disproportionately building solar panels on our land instead of drilling oil from them. So this is a country of competition. We should be supporting the Black-owned car company as well as Tesla if necessary. And lastly, I want to say that there was a Black man who worked at the Tesla factory in Fremont, California, who was called the N-word, right, disproportionately, and he had to sue Tesla and won $130 million. I only shout him out to uplift my people, because we should understand that Elon only used $20 million to create the Tesla company that he has today. So while he's at the forefront for technology with the Gigapress and other ways to disproportionately build electric vehicles, we can have a Black-owned electric vehicle company that's too big to fail, supported by the government, if we tie it to this reparations proposal. So thank you to everyone who's listening. Again, it's 40 acres in a Tesla, 40 acres in an EV, and really 40 acres in a MIMS, a Black-owned electric vehicle company. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gaines. Trini, you said we had one more speaker?
Yes, the next speaker is Sherry DC. You've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, my name is Cherie DC. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'll try to be very brief. I am a genealogist and a reparationist. I spent the better part of the last year helping freedmen, descendants of American chattel slavery, trace their lineage. And I think that that is a burden that is unfairly placed on our lineage. We should not have to spend money to go out and figure out what our family history is through acts of individuals, corporations, and the government has all disseminated and fractured our family history. And I think that it is incumbent upon this task force to aid in descendants of American chattel slavery in identifying their particular family history, so that that is the first step in actually reclaiming everything that has been taken from us. People look to Bruce Beach as an example. There are many people in our lineage who had family that was taken from, that had land, that was taken through eminent domain and other nefarious means. And I just want to stress how expensive it is for descendants of American chattel slavery to put their history, their family history together. The information is there, and it should not be so hard for people to find it and be able to lay out exactly their connection to chattel slavery. I really want to stress that. People should not be coming out of their pocket with thousands of dollars to just learn a history that is being hidden from us by our own government. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Cherie, Ms. Cherie. Do we have anyone else in the queue at this time?
Yes, we do. The next speaker is Kelly Farish. Ms. Farish, you've been unmuted. You may now speak. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Again, my name is Kelly Farish, and I was a part of a class action lawsuit against Chase Bank. We represented all of the Black financial advisors, and we were able to settle with them in 2018. The reason why I am a part of this task force, because the types of practices that these large banks are doing, it's particularly affecting the Black community, and they are purposely using their business power to take away services in our communities. And it's particular to us. In our lawsuit, they have a demographic match where they are purposely not allowing African Americans to have investment advice in any of the branches that are located in low to moderate income areas. And those are areas that are heavily populated with African American people. So a part of this task force has to address the fact that wealth is generated in the community through large banking institutions. And if we are not allowed to participate in receiving loans, receiving investment advice, that further is deteriorating our ability to participate in the larger economic growth in the United States. And that's something that is particular to us. They have admitted through different meetings that we've had with them and through their attorneys that they do demographic matching. So it's really important that we tag these large banking institutions and that they should be responsible for participating in the reparations payout to African Americans specifically. And that was what I wanted to say.
Ms. Farish, thank you so much for your comments this morning. Trini, do we have anyone else at this time?
Yes, let me see if I can get them over quick enough. Hold on.
Okay.
Amaru Young, please press continue. Our next speaker is Amaru Young. You have been unmuted. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Continue, please.
Hello. Hello. Thank you, most honorable guests of the task force. Thank you again for having this, for staying steadfast in this, and keeping the conversation as it should be on the descendants. I just want to call in and speak on what the brother spoke about earlier about these legacy so-called reparation groups and how they have not been dealing honestly or fairly with the people. You guys have showed what true transparency is through your task force by allowing people to view, set in, and make comments. But unfortunately, when we're looking at the HR 40 bill, we're seeing that a lot of non-transparency is taking place. And like the gentleman said, it's coming out of the NCOBRA and the NARC organizations that are doing this, that are keeping the people blind and not really focusing on what the people has been requesting. And we've been requesting edits and updates to the HR 40 bill. And so I just want to call in to just make sure that point is driven home. I want it on record that the people are not, do not trust NCOBRA, do not trust NARC to do their due diligence and making sure that this reparation fight goes to the actual descendants of the worst crime done to humanity by the United States government. Thank you again for letting me speak. And thank you for your work.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Trini, do we have anyone else?
Yes, our next speaker is Brandon. Brandon, you've been unmuted. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Fico reparations. I think it's important to take into account the technology.
Mr. Brandon, can you speak up a little louder?
Yes, is it better? What about?
Not very much. How about a louder?
Oh, hold on.
Hello? Is that better?
That is much better. Thank you.
No, sorry about that. Sorry about that. I was listening on the Bluetooth. But yes. So I think we have to take into account the technology aspect as far as innovations being made daily with technology and making sure Black American descendants of chattel slavery aren't left out as far as the metaverse is concerned, as far as artificial intelligence and the things that they're doing with that and the progress. So I just hope you all can incorporate that into whatever we're talking about here. And I do want to drive home that lineage matters in this as well. It's not for everyone. It's only for those who have helped build this country and ancestors been here hundreds of years. And I think that's a very important note to take. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Moore, we have, I believe, by my calculations, 9 minutes left for the public comment hour. So that would be 2 more speakers. Trini, do we have anybody else in the queue?
Yes, the next speaker is Daryl Edwards. Mr. Edwards, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak. Daryl Edwards. We can see you, Mr. Edwards. Can you speak, please? We can't hear you. Mr. Edwards?
Trini, maybe we can come back to him. Is that possible?
Yes.
Who do we have next?
One moment. Iris Peoples, please press continue. We're just waiting for Iris Edwards to press continue, please. Iris Peoples, I'm sorry. There we go. Iris Peoples.
Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you guys so much for all that you do. My name is Iris, as you said, and I have been a Californian for my entire life. I happen to be a descendant, of the Great Migration. My family comes by way of Louisiana and then by way of the Carolinas and then Virginia. Trace my lineage to the 1600s so far, and I'm just really, really thankful to you guys for what you are doing, and especially in terms of technology. I would like you guys to please take into account the education aspect and to please make sure that our children have access to adequate technology for education, but also for going forward to train for the future. One thing that I have found is that in being going through the education system here in California myself, in the Bay Area, I was told that a lot of our lower scores were due to the high Hispanic population and the high immigrant population. And so while I saw a lot of resources being taken away in terms of trade, wood shop, mechanics, home ec, sewing, music, all of those things, I saw resources being allocated at the same time to people who didn't speak English, but I assuming that they really needed it. And then when I saw some data, because I am involved as a parent, I saw that English language children were actually scoring higher on the standardized tests than children who were Black or poor. So I think I do want to make sure to put that on record, that we need to make sure that as we are taking care of our immigrant children, that we are not leaving our natural born or, not our, our children are not being left behind. And that's unfortunately what the record is showing. So thank you guys for everything. And please make sure to consider, the children as well in technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Peoples. Let's see, just a time check-in, share more. It's about 10:04, and it looks like we have about 6 more minutes. Trini, do we have anyone else?
There's no one else in the queue, but I'm going to try and give Mr. Edwards another chance. I did try to find out if he had any issues, but I didn't receive a response. So we'll give him a second try and see if he can comment now. Mr. Edwards, can you hear us? Daryl Edwards. Okay, he's not responding, and I did not get a response from chat from him. And there just some Virginia Ladish. Please press continue. Ms. Ladish, you have been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Virginie Ladish. I'm calling from the International Center for Transitional Justice. I just want to thank you all for the incredible work that you're doing, and just wanted to introduce myself and let you know that we're an international organization with headquarters in New York, but offices around the world. And we've worked with countries and groups to advocate and advance for reparations policies. And I just want to offer our support in your efforts in any way possible that you might need. We'll be very happy to share some ideas that have been successful in other contexts, as well as some pitfalls you might want to avoid, if that could be helpful. So I just want to share that, and thank you all for your work.
Thank you, Ms. Ladish, for providing your comments this morning. Chair Moore, it is now 10:07, and I do not believe we have anyone else in the queue. Do we, Trini?
Actually, we have 2 people in the queue.
All right, Chair Moore, your pleasure. It's 10:07.
Pick the last 2.
All right, these will be our last 2 speakers for the morning. Okay, Trini, bring them up.
Please press continue. Kay Easter and Antonio Thomas, please press continue. Antonio Thomas, you have been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Hello.
Yes, please speak.
Good morning.
Hello, my name is. Hey, how you doing? First, I'd like to say thank you for this platform, and I respect everything that y'all are doing. And my name is Antonio Thomas, and I just want to go through and say this, that I see around this nation, inside these in other cities and other states, they doing similar things, but they always saying one particular thing is a study, you know, and I understand what studies are, but I rather say collect the information and act upon what need to be acted upon, because we always know, we always remember that slavery was an institution that started in 1619. We always remember that slavery was an institution in 1776 when America gained its independence, where we fought in that war and still was enslaved. We always remember that we didn't get our freedom till 1865, and we fought into this war for independence and was promised 40 acres and a mule and was given a protected class status as freemen. We always remember we went back into slavery once then when they assassinated Lincoln, and then we became into another slave status when they changed our designation, and we went through convict leasing. We went through other terrorism and other things that were set on by KKKs that burned down our towns and everything else that was subjugated on us, and we still survived and went through. So we always remember that for our people. And I want y'all to always remember that those things was never promised, those things was never given, and those things are deserved. And that is what we are asking for, nothing but the respect, the honor, and that check that's owed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas, for your comments this morning. Trini, I believe we have one more speaker, and this will be our last speaker of this morning.
Yes. Kay Easter, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for this task force and your transparency and everything you guys are doing. I'm excited about this discussion about technology right now, because one of the things that we have learned from the Roy Beck book, Back of the Hiring Line, there were some statistics provided that showed that Black Americans used to hold a significant amount of tech jobs back in the 90s. And so it seems that there was a concerted effort to move us out of that industry by bringing in other people from other countries. So I would love to hear, some more information on that, or, some further discussion in the future into more research in terms of how that, was done and how it harmed us. Because, there's this idea that we don't want tech jobs and, things like that, and it's just not true. Also, our people who are in the tech industry are experiencing a lot of racism and a lot of, stressful, disgusting situations that they're placed in the work environment due to this same type of concerted effort to push us out. So again, I thank you guys so much, and I'm looking forward to, further discussion on that, or more details that are provided in terms of investigating that situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Easter, for your comments this morning. Thank you all. We have reached the allotted time for public comment. If you are not able to provide a comment, we invite you to attend future public meetings or to submit written comments or testimony via email at reparationstaskforce@doj.ca.gov. And I will now turn the meeting back over to Chair Moore. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martin Walton, and thank you, Ms. Hurtado, for your assistance. So we'll now go to our first panel of the year and of the day. Before we do that, I want to acknowledge Senator Stephen Bradford. Welcome. And so our first witness panel of the day is on discrimination in technology. And we have 4 incredible expert witnesses who will provide expert testimony today. Our first expert witness will be Yeshimabeit Milner, who is the co-founder and executive director of Data for Black Lives. Raised in Miami, Florida, Yeshi began organizing against the school-to-prison pipeline at Power Youth Center for Social Change as a high school senior. There, she developed a lifelong commitment to movement building as a vehicle for creating and sustaining large-scale social change. Yeshi returned to Power U in 2013 to lead a victorious campaign to improve breastfeeding policies at the largest public hospital in the country. More recently, she was a campaign manager at Color of Change, where she spearheaded several major national initiatives, including Organize, for the only online petition platform dedicated to building the political voice of Black people, and a successful campaign to remove Bill O'Reilly from television. She has a Bachelor of Arts from Brown University and serves on the board of the Highlander Center in Tennessee. We'll also hear from Vincent Lee. As a legal counsel with the Greenlining Institute's Economic Equity Team, Vincent leads Greenlining's work to close the digital divide, protect consumer privacy, ensure algorithms are fair, and that technology builds economic opportunity for communities of color. In this role, Vincent helps develop and implement policies to increase broadband affordability and digital inclusion, as well as bring transparency and accountability to automated decision systems. Vincent also serves on several regulatory boards, including the California Privacy Protection Agency. We'll also hear from his colleague, Deborah Gorman. Deborah Gorman finds gratitude in developing long-term relationships, dynamic teams, and shared accomplishments. As a middle child of a biracial, military, first-generation immigrant family, Deborah embraces the beauty and the strength that lies in her differences. As Greenlining's president and CEO, Deborah guides the organization's growth and direction and serves as a unifying voice for our multifaceted policy work, bringing her unique intersectional perspective to bear. She partners with the staff and board to develop programs and policy strategies to advance racial and economic justice and to strengthen ties with the Greenlining Coalition. We'll also hear from Dr. Sathyan Noble. Sathyan Noble is an internet studies scholar and professor of gender studies and African American studies at the University of California, Los Angeles, where she serves as the co-founder and co-director of the UCLA Center for Critical Internet Inquiry. She holds affiliations in the School of Education and Information Studies and is a research associate at the Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford, where she is a commissioner on the Oxford Commission on AI and Good Governance. In 2021, she was recognized as a MacArthur Foundation Fellow, also known as the Genius Award, for her groundbreaking work on algorithmic discrimination. Dr. Noble is a board member of the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative, serving those vulnerable to online harassment. She is the author of a best-selling book on racist and sexist algorithmic bias in commercial search engines entitled Algorithms of Oppression: How Search Engines Reinforce Racism, which has been widely reviewed in scholarly and popular publications. So without further ado, we will go to our first expert witness, which is Ms. Milner. Ms. Milner, you have 15 minutes, and then we'll go to Vincent Lee and Deborah Gorman, and then Dr. Safiya Noble. Welcome, Ms. Milner.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay, good. I know that Trini will be uploading my slides. So, thank you. Once again, thank you, Chairwoman Moore, and thank you to Lisa Holder, Don Tamaki, and all members of the task force to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans. I also want to thank Alicia Turner and Trini Hurtado for their work ensuring that logistically I was set to give expert testimony today. Surely the effort to recognize and repay the debt owed to Black American descendants of slaves demonstrates justice in its truest form. As the introduction said, my name is Yeshimabeit Milner. I'm the founder and executive director of Data for Black Lives. We are a movement of over 20,000 scientists and activists working to make data a tool for social change instead of a weapon of political oppression. I started Data for Black Lives because for far too long, data has been weaponized against Black communities. Because the bullets, police dogs, and fire hoses of the past have become the predictive policing, data-driven voter suppression, and facial recognition of the present. You can go to the next slide, Trini. Thank you. My testimony is foregrounded in our call to action to abolish big data. If you want to learn more about this, you can find my talks online on YouTube or on our website. But briefly today, it is a call to action that recognizes that the big data systems that are becoming implemented and normalized are not novel or innovative or revolutionary at all, but they are a part of a long and pervasive historical legacy and technological timeline of scientific oppression, aggressive public policy, and the most influential political and economic system that has and continues to shape this country's economy, chattel slavery. I believe that what we face today, and we must name, is a data industrial complex, where zip code is destiny, debt becomes a ball and chain weaponized by complex and obscure financial systems that I'll talk about later, where data is a strategy to rob people of political power by manipulating elections, a system where the persistent, archaic, and racist notions of risk persist, narratives that are more powerful and impenetrable than any prison cell or shackles or holds that could ever be built. And go to the next slide. In my testimony today, I'll be discussing how the notions of risk that actually originated in the slave trade through insurance agencies and other slave finance have come today to foreground the black box algorithms and other data-enabled technologies that unless we fight for sweeping policy change like reparations, we will repeat history and actually usher in
some of the most violent and human and civil rights assaults of our lifetime. To bring it personally, the very first time I even heard the term at risk was in the 4th grade. Another student, coincidentally in our elementary school's computer lab, told me that she was at risk. Immediately, just hearing the word elicited a sense of fear and worry in me as a 9-year-old. I asked her what she meant. She told me that she was enrolled in an after-school program for at-risk students, for kids who are at risk of going to prison, of having unwanted pregnancy or joining a gang. Of course, she liked the after-school program, but it was as if the lack of funding at our under-resourced, predominantly Black and immigrant school offered limited options for extracurricular activities, as well as very narrow options for what and who we could become. And this became a self-fulfilling prophecy. While I myself and others survived the school to prison pipeline, many of my peers did not, as they not only had to fight to overcome the material circumstances of their lives, but also the narratives and stereotypes that continue to criminalize them. You can go to the next slide. Thank you so much. So this is an example of one of my favorite forms of machine learning, used to power autocorrect and synonyms in most text editing software. In this, we see the connotations of risk: danger, jeopardy, hazard, gamble, probability, menace. Again, how did this term used primarily in business, originating in the slave trade, insurance, loss prevention, and in finance, become a label operationalized through policy and weaponized against young people, children, and young people like myself and my friend? With the end of the civil rights movement, the war on drugs, or the war on communities as we call it, and with the introduction of massive legislation in support of mass incarceration, came a wave of research and data to justify the targeted and coordinated effort to warehouse entire communities into prisons. You can go to the next slide, thank you. Super predator was introduced by social scientist and Bush administration advisor John DeLillo in 1995. DeLillo created a whole theory around the notion that a new generation of street criminals is upon us, the youngest, biggest, and baddest generation anyone has ever seen and known. Based on all that we have witnessed, researched, and heard from people who are close to the action, he wrote, "Here is what we believe. America is now home to thickening ranks of juvenile super predators, radically impulsive, brutally remorseless youngsters who rape, murder, assault, rob, burglarize, deal drugs, and create serious communal disorders." You can go to the next slide, thank you. Of course, none of this was true. The data, in fact, showed that crime was decreasing across the board at this time. And John DeLillo would go on to refute his research and his racist claims and become Catholic, as you all can see in this article here. But of course, by this time, the cat was out the bag. And of course, John DeLillo was not alone. You can go to the next slide. In the 1980s, well before Super Predator, Dr. Ira Chasnoff built an entire career off of the crack baby myth, which was based on a flimsy study consisting of only 23 participants. Of course, his hypothesis was lockstep with the most racist political intentions, a fear that one day a generation of children will grow up to be crack addicted and a burden to civil society. All of this was wrong, and the study should have been refuted based on the sample size alone. But it was not, and the myth persisted, even though, again, the reality was opposite. One of the babies from the study grew up to be a healthy, functional, and quite exceptional young woman, the first in her family to graduate from college. It was found that poverty, rather than crack addiction, which then was a proxy for Blackness, was found to be more harmful in a child's life. You can go to the next slide, thank you. Similarly, the welfare queen myth was used and continues to be used to dismantle our country's safety net, fight against cash payment for reparations, privatize social services, and siphon money away from the very communities who need them and who pay for them with taxpayer dollars. Meanwhile, the real welfare queens are the ones who benefit, are the corporations who benefit more from government subsidies than all individual welfare recipients combined. You can go to the next slide, thank you. So before we can talk about what an algorithm is, we have to talk about what goes into it. Of course, input data, and output, scores, recommendations, but above that, history and values. To define an algorithm, by definition, it is a set of step-by-step instructions to solve a problem. A recipe is an algorithm, a list of instructions or a process to make the dish, the ingredients that make up the dish, and the result based on what we define from the beginning of the recipe as a success. Whether we want to make something that's healthy or something that tastes good, regardless of health benefits. The decisions are determined by a question: what are we optimizing? Excuse me. Computational algorithms are layered, complicated. Their ingredients are not just raw data that is fed into them, and the result is not as simple as the outputs that come out of them. Scores, ratios, GPS routes, or even Netflix recommendations. But again, as this chart demonstrates, history and values are what influence inputs and outputs, and most importantly, the very models that are trained and developed, the algorithms themselves. One example are FICO credit scores. Contrary to popular belief, FICO is not a federal agency, but the Fair and Isaac Company, a for-profit entity started by William Fair and Earl Isaac, a mathematician and engineer who 25 years ago sought to disrupt the risk and lending industry through the use of machine learning. The inputs to the FICO algorithm, as we are told, are the amount of debt we have, the percentage of missed payments, etc. And this information, our data, are provided through the collusion of data brokers. We know them as Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, and then fed into the FICO algorithm, and out of the algorithm comes our score. And while we are told that certain behaviors and financial characteristics comprise our credit score, we aren't able to verify because FICO is a proprietary algorithm. It's a black box, devoid of transparency, and with the purpose of displacing accountability away from the for-profit companies that profit from our data at our expense. And also, FICO scores reflect the ways in which algorithms hold tremendous power over our lives, even though we have no recourse. Right at this very moment, there are students that will have to drop out of school because they cannot qualify for subsidized student loans. There are people who are struggling to afford rising public transportation costs because they can't afford subprime car payments, and even hardworking families facing homelessness because they cannot qualify to rent an apartment, all because of a 3-digit number. And these 3-digit numbers it will increasingly decide whether we should get hired for the job, and maybe even someday, even whether we'll be able to vote. And while it is in violation of federal law to deny people housing, employment, and education based on race, you can't sue an algorithm. And private companies like FICO, who I must also mention, it is in their best interest to ensure that some people have low scores and others don't, argue that their algorithms don't discriminate. They say nowhere in that algorithm or in their input is race a variable. And there's so much research that also indicates the ways in which, even when you control in different neighborhoods, such as there was a study done in Illinois for income and for education and the amount of death, Black folks in some zip codes had much lower scores than white folks in other zip codes, even when controlling for those other factors. Because we know that based on the history of our country, you can go to the next slide, thank you so much, Trini, how our neighborhoods and our municipalities are organized, you don't even need to use race as a variable. When redlining and segregation, the legacy of slavery, have made zip codes proxies for race. And this is a history that I think everyone on the call knows. But only 7 generations after slavery, 6 million African Americans left the South for the industrial centers of the North, Midwest, and West Coast of this country in a historical moment known as the Great Black Migration. As Black people contributed tremendously to the growth of the manufacturing industry and to the culture and politics of metropolitan life, our federal government responded through policies that sought to institutionalize racist sentiments and permanently entrench Black communities in a case-like status. Policies that were foregrounded in the most essential part of economic mobility in the US, home ownership. You can go to the next slide, thank you again. In 1933, as part of the New Deal, the Homeowners Loan Corporation developed a grading system that deemed some areas desirable while others hazardous. These areas were largely minority areas, many Black, And today, 74% of the areas deemed hazardous, quote unquote, according to this rating system, in 1933 remain today low income, under-resourced, and neglected. It did not matter that federal law ruled racial zoning unconstitutional, real estate boards, neighborhood associations, and white mob violence made it impossible for Black people to own homes, and were deeply invested into turning these communities into sacrifice zones. And this is a map of Oakland, for an example I'm going to use now, but it's amazing how zip codes created in the 20th century to organize the country around for the Postal Service have become digital artifacts of this history, encoding this history, and therefore extending the shelf life on the racist public policies of the past. You can go to the next slide. I saw how notions of risk, how the impact of zip codes, and how even these maps became again present as a young organizer in Oakland, California. I was a youth organizer at an organization in the summer of 2009 at the height of the foreclosure crisis. Part of my job was to do data collection for a survey led by Just Cause Oakland, my internship site, along with the Alameda County Health Department, to document and expose the effect of foreclosures and evictions on the health of residents. This is a chart that from the report that we developed. In 1980, 47% of Oakland was Black. Today, according to the 2020 census, Black people make up less than 24% of Oakland's population, although the population of the city itself has been growing for years. How did it happen that since 2010, with over 50 new white and Hispanic Oakland residents have moved into Oakland and have been able to take advantage of opportunities of being in a booming metropolitan hub, while the Black families that built the city and laid roots were forced to leave the city in droves? And one way that I witnessed firsthand was through the targeting of Black communities through the complex financial schemes that resulted in the foreclosure crisis of 2010. In addition to my role doing data collection that summer, my job was to also organize residents in West Oakland to stand with their neighbors against the banks. And I love that somebody brought up the banks. I think Ms. Kelly Bears, I wrote your name down. In the event of a foreclosure eviction, which were happening daily, every day, I met with residents who had fallen victims of predatory lenders, who with the promise of more affordable mortgages or a second mortgage to help cover medical bills or pay for renovations and repairs, were aggressively targeted for subprime predatory lending. Next slide. People like Miss Elizabeth, whose family had left the sharecropping conditions of the South to come to California, a state that held the promise of opportunity that was not possible in the South and much harder to achieve in the cold and racist North. Miss Elizabeth's husband found work in the West Oakland Navy Yard like so many other Black men born only a generation away from slavery. The Victorian house that they bought and where she and her husband raised their children and even their grandchildren was seized in only 9 months after a nice representative, quote unquote, from the bank visited her daily, promising that with a second mortgage, which they said she qualified for, she'd be able to pay back medical bills that piled up since her husband's death and even leave some cash for her children to do necessary renovations. She was told that all these payments would be well under the amount she received monthly from Social Security and pensions. But they did not tell her that she was given an adjustable rate mortgage and that her mortgage would balloon in months to far from what she could afford, making payments too expensive and causing her to default on her payments and lose her home. As you can see in the map, the rate of defaults, as well as where we see that the hazardous mapping definitely overlays. It shows a trend and it shows the extent of the targeting as well. And they definitely did not tell Miss Elizabeth that her mortgage was being repackaged with other mortgages and pulled together in these complex and obscure financial schemes, securitize and then re-securitize as credit default swaps, and that there was a lot of money being made by banks and hedge funds betting on her inability to be able to pay this adjustable rate mortgage. When Black families all across California and all over the US shuttled their belongings into storage units, closed the doors in their mother's or father's home for the last time, or like Miss Angela, another leader I work with, became sick from legal battles with Wachovia Bank because her home was defaulted due to robo-signed documents. They literally had an automated system that signed people's documents to push forward default and foreclosure. But all this happened, bank executives and hedge fund managers walked away with a slap on the wrist, millions in bonuses, and have even been since awarded with positions in the former and present presidential administration. In fact, if the federal government is ever in need of an example, how to redistribute cash payments, and in a large amount, they should look no further than 2009. Big banks that were deemed too big to fail were given the biggest bailout and the biggest example of reparations I think we'd ever seen under the Dodd-Frank Act, to the tune of trillions. In fact, we are still calculating exactly how much money banks received, while people like Miss Angela, Miss Elizabeth, and all the people that I worked with at Summer in Oakland lost their homes permanently. The foreclosure crisis was a man-made crisis against Black families, Black home ownership, and Black stability. You can go to the next slide. Thank you, Trini. And today, there are many other examples of how notions of risk are being perpetuated through black box algorithms and weaponized against Black communities. I know my co-panelists will likely provide more context on others, but if we look at this theme of risk more, we see this evident in risk assessment questionnaires, where instead of jury and instead of judges, people are being sentenced to time based on questions like, were you suspended? Or does a hungry person have a right to steal? Knowing that with a question like suspension, in many counties and states, Black students are 8 or 9 times more likely to be suspended than their white peers, not because they're bad kids, but because of racist entrenched practices and policies in schools. In the area of car insurance, we see here that this is a mapping of Chicago. On the left here is the Homeowner Loan Corporation map, and on the right is a map in the dark pink where people have to pay the highest premiums. Literally, people in Black neighborhoods are paying more on insurance premiums, even though there's less crime than folks who live in wealthier, whiter, more downtown areas. Next slide, please. And it's even getting into health. This is an article from an investigation that I think is still going on with United Health and their algorithm that literally used cost of care, or how much people are able to spend on care, to determine health risk and therefore care needs. Of course, this algorithm, which was used on hundreds of millions of patients, neglected and denied care to Black patients who are more at risk. Because again, we live in a country where who has the health insurance to be able to pay out more for care? Not Black folks, white folks, and other folks. And this is another example of the way in which, an interesting way, in this case, Black people were more at risk, but it was used to deny them care. You can go to the next slide, thank you. But we also, to kind of conclude and wrap up, remember, as folks in our network always say, Black Americans arrived here on balance sheets, and they themselves, us, we were collected as collateral for debt owed. And so none of these practices are surprising, but they should inspire urgency. You can go to the next slide. This is one example that I like to show in my presentations and research of a balance sheet used by a slave plantation in British Guyana, where actually my family were enslaved and where we're fighting for reparations there. And literally there was a line for each day and columns for many types of categories of enslaved men, women, and children. They include in the field, watchmen, house servants, carpenters, children's invalids, runaways. The daily process of dehumanization was deeply numerical. Right below these abstracts were identical reports for livestock. The Negro account and livestock account use the same methods of taking an inventory, calculating increase and decrease, purchase, sale, birth, with little difference made for man, woman, child, oxen, goat, and cattle. And of course, it's not lost on me that the name of this plantation was also called Hope and Experiment. One person mentioned that JP Morgan Chase, and it's true. JP Morgan Chase, currently the biggest bank in the US, admitted that its subsidiaries accepted enslaved people as collateral for loans. So we're talking about loans, we're talking about payment, we're talking about default. If plantation owners defaulted on loan payment, the bank took ownership of enslaved Africans. And JP Morgan was not alone. The other predecessors made up, their predecessors made up Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo's, and a whole list of other financial firms. You can go to the next slide. And finally, to conclude, I want to wrap it up so I have time for other folks to speak. The story of Black Americans, slavery, and algorithmic discrimination, again, what we are fighting against is not new, but you can really literally pull a thread through all of these events in history over the last 400 to 500 years. And as the late civil rights scholar Leeda Torre wrote, Black folks in America, when it comes to algorithmic discrimination, are like miners in a canary, miners' canaries. Miners often carry the canary into the mine alongside them. The canary's more fragile respiratory system would cause it to collapse from noxious gases long before humans were affected, thus alarming miners to danger. The canary's distress signaled that it was time to get out of the mine because the air was becoming too poisonous to breathe. As she writes, those who are racially marginalized are like the miners' canaries. Their distress is the first sign of danger that threatens us all. It is easy to think of that when we sacrifice this canary, the only harm is to other communities of color. Yet others ignore problems that converge around racial minorities at their own peril, for these problems are synonymous warning that we are all at risk. At Data for Black Lives, we fully support cash payments and sweeping policy changes in support of a reparations agenda. And we believe that this has to be done not only to repair the harm done and what has been taken and lost, but we must do it in order to secure the civil and human rights for Black Americans and literally everyone else in the age of big data. To abolish big data means to dismantle the structures that concentrate the power in the hands of a few and to put it in the hands of those who need it the most. At Data for Black Lives, our mission is to reclaim data as power, as protest, and as collective action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Milner, for that incredibly moving and thought-provoking testimony, and especially with your last comments. Rest in peace, Harvard professor Alani Guinier. Now, without further ado, we will turn to Vincent Lee and Deborah Gorman.
And Deborah, do you want to go first?
No, go ahead, Vincent.
Okay. Trini, could you pull up the slides? All right. Well, good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for allowing us to speak on discrimination in technology for the Reparations Task Force. I am Vincent Lee, legal counsel for the Greenlining Institute, and I am joined by Deborah Gorman, our president and CEO. Next slide. So at the Greenlining Institute, we focus on creating a nation where communities of color thrive and race is not a barrier to economic opportunity. Slide. And a key goal in that work is to close the massive racial wealth gap where white families have more than 10 times the wealth of Black families, a gap that is only growing. Next slide. And much of this gap is due to the practice of redlining and the legacy of slavery. And for redlining, as we mentioned earlier, it's where government, banks, realtors, insurers all work together to draw literal red lines around communities of color, preventing Black families from building wealth for generations due to lack of access to investment, loans, home ownership, essentially the building blocks of economic opportunity, all on the basis of race. So my work today focuses on the modern forms of redlining and discrimination in technology. In particular, I focus on the digital divide and discrimination in algorithms and automated decision system. Next slide. And so the main point I want to make today is that redlining lives on in the data that determines which neighborhoods get good access to the internet or new services and technologies. Only the difference today is that it's not done on the basis of race and redlining maps, but on the basis of zip codes, as mentioned earlier, income levels, educational attainment, infrastructure quality, all data points heavily influenced by the legacy of redlining and racial discrimination. And this is why the reparations work is so important. I'll explain with a quick example. So in 2016, Bloomberg did some research and found that Amazon deployed its Prime same-day service in Atlanta in a way where virtually all the white residents had access to the service compared to less than half the Black residents. And this was the case in other cities where predominantly Black neighborhoods were excluded, while their surrounding areas had service. You can see that in Roxbury in Boston, on the south side of Chicago. And these decisions weren't made on the basis of race, but they were made on the basis of zip codes and wealth. Communities that had more Amazon subscribers were more profitable, got more investments and services, while poorer, Blacker, and formerly redline neighborhoods were ignored. And this may make sense from a short-sighted business perspective, but by that same logic, it makes business sense to continue to discriminate and redline Black neighborhoods, further limiting economic opportunity and creating a vicious cycle. And that's where we're at today. And this is why the reparations work is so important. It gives us a chance to change the data points that give rise to data-driven discrimination, so we can break that cycle of disinvestment, build wealth, and close the racial wealth gap. The next slide. And we can see another example of this data-driven redlining if we look at access to the internet. A USC study found that in LA, lower income and Blacker neighborhoods had the least broadband investment. When we mapped out the internet access and affordability in Oakland, we found that our maps look just the same as those redlining maps in the 1930s that you saw earlier. Similar studies across the country led to the same result. And from our previous example, we already know the root cause of this. Income inequality in the racial wealth gap means less investment. Less investment means fewer choices, higher prices, leading to lower adoption of critical tools like the internet and widening the racial wealth gap. Next slide. You can see this in the data, which shows that Black families are almost 10% less likely to have the internet than white ones, even after making significant gains during the pandemic. And this gap limits economic opportunity for Black families in many ways. Next slide. The first one is that limited digital access means lower digital skill scores. If you don't have the internet, you don't have a computer at home, then you're not going to build the skills that you need for quality, high-paying jobs. Next slide. And we can see that because, you know, the future of work requires more and more digital skills, and getting a good job requires that as well. Next slide. And folks mentioned earlier about internet access and academic scores. Well, the digital divide really also impacts the ability of our communities to find academic success. Black teens are almost twice as likely to report that they can't finish their homework due to lack of internet or a computer. And lower internet access also means worse scores on math, science, and reading tests. Through all of these, you can see that lack of access to technology means lack of access to economic opportunity. Next slide. And the key issue is affordability. And this is something that we can address by building wealth for Black families through reparations. We also need additional policy changes. Next slide. I'm going to skip over most of these. We've made big progress in the past year in investing in broadband in California. We have a new affordability program to help folks pay for internet access. But we should do this year is focus our budget on making sure the communities that need these services actually know about them and can access them. And if we do this right, we can finally close that digital divide and ensure that internet access is not that barrier to economic opportunity. Next slide. So now I'm going to shift gears. We just talked about how data points about wealth can limit access to convenient services like Amazon Prime, as well as essential technologies like the internet. But a similar kind of data-driven discrimination can happen in many other ways through the use of algorithms and automated decisions. Slide. So as mentioned earlier, an algorithm is just a set of rules to follow. And what we at Greenlining are concerned about are automated decision systems that look at large data sets to find statistical patterns to make decisions, right? And we're worried that without proper oversight, these systems can embed the very real history of discrimination and redlining that are reflected in the statistics and the data into their decisions, creating algorithmic bias. Next slide. And this is a key issue for greenlining because algorithmic systems can determine who succeeds and who doesn't. And in the next few slides, I'm going to go over some examples of this in different sectors and how this discrimination and bias impacts economic opportunity. Next slide. So my first example, as you heard earlier, is from the housing and credit sector. So last year, the markup was able to do a study thanks to newly released federal mortgage data. And they found out that housing algorithms that determine who can get a loan to buy a home discriminated against communities of color such that in some areas, a white loan applicant was 2.5 times more likely to get a loan than a black applicant, even though they had similar credit characteristics and income. Next slide. What's more, these lending disparities persist even when you just look at credit scores and when you look at places with more consumer protections like California. So a couple takeaways from this study is that race is not a factor in these algorithmic decisions, and yet we have disparate impact and discrimination based on race. Another is that the regulator in charge doesn't know why these discrepancies happen. So that points to the need for a more technically capable oversight and regulatory bodies. And another is that the disclosure of this data was key to find these inequities, and that we need to make this happen more, and we need race-aware data so that we can test these systems that control access to economic opportunity for bias and discrimination. And the final takeaway for me from this study is that the housing discrimination and the redlining of the past is still quite well and alive today, and our anti-discrimination laws have not kept pace with these technologies. Next slide. And there's other ways that housing discrimination can manifest, right? We now have digital tools that make it easier than ever to target and exclude people on the basis of race. In 2017, ProPublica found out that users on Facebook can exclude people from seeing job ads or housing on the basis of race. And there was lawsuits and HUD investigations afterwards. And these powerful targeting tools can be used to further discrimination or can be used in a predatory way that impacts our most disadvantaged communities. Next slide. So even back in 2014, a Senate investigation showed that advertisers were creating customer lists that could be used to target predatory products like high interest payday loans to financially vulnerable populations. These types of tools without the appropriate protections can work against closing that racial wealth gap and keep families in poverty. And on the other hand, in the right hands, these tools can target resources and aid those that need. Next slide. Thank you. So shifting from housing to employment, we found that employment algorithms can learn the same biases as humans, right? An algorithm trained on Amazon's hiring data learned to discriminate against women, perhaps reflecting a culture where men are more likely to be hired and promoted in tech jobs. And we know that Black people are underrepresented in tech, but we need more transparency to make sure that hiring employment algorithms aren't discriminating on the basis of protected classes like race and gender. Next slide. Another example that was talked about in the previous presentation showed, a medical algorithm that determined who had access to better care would preference white patients over sicker Black ones. And that was because white patients spent more money than Black ones. And the hospital assumed that more money meant you were sicker. While the root cause of that is the systemic inequality and discrimination that has led to Black families having lower abilities to afford and access medical care. Next slide. So I have two more examples. So beyond medical care, more and more government systems are turning to AI to determine who gets access to social programs like unemployment, child services, medical care. But many of these systems aren't properly vetted or tested before deployment, resulting in improper denials that impact communities of color the hardest. For example, in Michigan, an automated unemployment system wrongly accused tens of thousands of people of fraud, forcing them to make repayments that led families to declare bankruptcy. So one even committed suicide. The exact causes of the errors are not clear, but we need to make sure we catch these issues before we deploy the system in ways that impact communities of color. So that's why Greenlining sponsored AB 13 last year that would require government agencies to do risk assessments to make sure that this kind of discrimination and this kind of errors don't happen. Next slide. So for my final example, it concerns pricing algorithms and in particular insurance. A study from 2020 found that insurers like Allstate were using sophisticated pricing algorithms to create sucker lists, families that were that they could charge more, sometimes increasing rates by thousands of dollars more than pay on their driving risk. This impacts seniors and low-income families the most, and families that are already disadvantaged and reliant on social services to make ends meet. You know, that extra $100, extra $1,000 can make a really big difference, especially when you need insurance to drive. We don't have the racial breakdowns of these data, of these algorithms, and that is something that we need to make sure that when regulators are looking at pricing algorithms for key services like insurance, they aren't discriminating improperly, particularly on the basis of race. And these pricing algorithms aren't used in insurance, right? So Princeton Review was charging Asian communities more for SAT services. Uber was charging more in Chicago to travel to non-white areas. These practices are common, however, and the impact will always be felt hardest by families that are already redlined and disadvantaged. So that's why reparations is so key, so that we can fight these types of data-driven discrimination. However, that alone is not enough. Next slide. You know, there's some policies that we need. We need to make sure that people know where the government is using automated decision systems that impact them. We need to make sure we test for disparate impact to make sure that these algorithms aren't discriminating. And we need disclosures of the data so that we can do that. And one thing Greenlining advocates for is race-aware data. You don't need to use someone's race to make a decision, but we should be able to test on the back end whether your decision is discriminating on the basis of race. And that also needs more technically competent regulators to do audits of these systems, and then we can update our civil rights laws and create regulatory red lines on which practices stop. And then finally, we can promote algorithmic greenlining. Next slide. So I want to end by noting that I'm a big supporter of the potential of new technologies to improve outcomes, right? We just need to make sure they're used properly. And we can see this potential using the Cal EnviroScreen algorithm in California. It uses equity indicators like poverty, unemployment, exposure to pollution, and they use that to identify disadvantaged communities that are eligible for increased investment from our greenhouse gas reduction fund. With the help of this algorithm, over $4.5 billion in state funding has gone towards investments in disadvantaged communities, with a big share of that going towards low-income Black and Latino communities, build things like affordable housing, urban greening, clean energy infrastructure, and more. And this algorithm provides potentially a template where we can undo this past discrimination, this past redlining, and use it to drive more investments into the communities that need it most to improve economic opportunities. Thank you. And Debbie, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Vincent. And I don't have a slide, so we don't need to have the slide presented. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Debbie Gorman. I'm the president and CEO of Greenlining. I'd like to really start by thanking Dr. Shirley Weber and the 9-member task force for your work and commitment to taking action to study, to develop the reparation proposals for Black families, with special consideration for the descendants of the enslaved, and a real advocate of the Gold Chains project at UCLA and how that's integrated with the work that you all are doing. And again, Greenlining is very appreciative of the task force, that you also have a recommendation of ways to educate the California public about the task force finding. Our work at Greenlining, we also find that there is a tremendous amount of misinformation and disinformation about Black families and the Black racial wealth gap. So that part of your task is well regarded, and we hope to support you in any way we can. A little bit about Greenlining. We've been doing this work for about 3 decades now. We were founded in 1993, so next year we will be celebrating 30 years of doing work that is the praxis of economic and economic equity along with racial equity, which really centers a lot of Black families and the impacts that we have felt over the decades. We have been learning from our missteps, and we've been reiterating and iterating our approaches with a deep dive into our communities of practice. So we try to be proximate as much as we can, and we listen to the community to tell us what it is that we can do to change policies and to remove discrimination and redlining. As Vincent Lay has presented, this pillar of our work on technology and tech equity actually has that thread through all of those things that represent wealth and closing the wealth gap. He started with housing, went to unemployment, talked about health, jobs, and pricing. And this is tough and ongoing, tedious work. And we found that the tech equity or disequity for the Black community is represented in governance, in access to power, in allocating and redistributing resources to communities. And those are all going to be key to how, you know, this reparation and the ability to put proposals forward is successful or not. And greenlining, just to give a perspective on how we look at closing the wealth gap, we use wealth as defined by the US Federal Reserve and as measured, right, by federal agencies to be the differences between the assets and the liabilities. And so the asset side of which, you know, we usually think is home ownership, because, you know, there are really 4 real basic ways that we all sort of generate our wealth and how we spend our income, right? So you're gonna have your home mortgage or rent, you're gonna buy food, you're gonna have transportation, and you're gonna pay energy for energy, water, utilities, all of that. And lastly, healthcare. So of those 4 things, there's only one way that you can actually invest in yourself, and that's in home ownership or how you pay your rent. Otherwise, which is grounded in land. Otherwise, that land ownership, you're paying your rent to somebody else. So if we're looking at sort of the assets and liabilities, then the difference is being your wealth. That gap for Black wealth versus white wealth is working on both. So with the asset side and looking at the discrimination of home ownership and any sort of income contribution, and the liabilities, the debt side. Well, guess what? Technology is the new frontier. I think you've heard from both Vincent and our previous speaker, is the new frontier for redlining. We're taking the data as our artifacts of political, economic, and racial and social racism, and we're taking that data and we're now building these algorithms that create output. So we need to have this perspective and sort of the analysis on these artifacts that we don't perpetuate redlining. Otherwise, this reparation work, we'll be doing it in 10 years again, right? So if we're closing the gap for Black communities, but we don't address technology and how it's perpetuating the redlining, we're going to be addressing that same reparations again. So I hope you see by what Vincent has presented and what we are presented, that the data and how the algorithms work is what's key. That the data disaggregated when we first got COVID, COVID hit our shores in 2019, it was for everybody. But we took that data and we disaggregated it, and we realized that Black communities and Latin communities were disproportionately impacted, right? That the data then helped us understand how we were going to solve the solution, and that it was landing on our Black communities different, and the impact was felt much wider and deeper. Right, that even though the Latinx community had larger cases, the Black community was dying more, disproportionately dying more. So data becomes so key, right? Just in that small example. And so what we've also learned that data now or technology is also a tool to leverage wealth, and that wealth currently exercises its power through politics, and that through the politics protects the wealth. Right, so there's that triangle: wealth, politics, power. Protect my wealth, politics, power. It's a cycle that we witnessed through Citizens United, voters' rights suppression. And so who sits at the top of that wealth cycle? If we're looking at wealth and the creation of wealth today, we see that the top mega cap companies, right? So now we're just really talking about capitalism and how Black folks are deprived from that capitalism. That the top mega cap meaning that the company is over $1 trillion capitalization, are tech companies. Apple, number one, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Alphabet, right? And that wealth seeks power, that power through politics that protects the wealth. So you've got tech companies now defining the way, right? When Amazon says we're going to go to $15 minimum wage, they don't need a federal law, they don't need a state law, right? Amazon of itself, $1 trillion company, is going to say we're going to raise the minimum wage. And Black folks are doing a lot of that warehouse work, driving a lot of those trucks in our communities. So the technology part exists both in the data and how it's used, and also on the capital that it's building in our society, and in California in particular. Because if you look at those top 5, and actually the 6th one is Tesla, Apple, California, Microsoft, Washington, Amazon, Washington, Facebook, California, Google, California, Tesla, California. Okay, so these tech companies will either perpetuate this landscape of discrimination and the wealth gap, as Vincent has presented, or reshape it. So both sides of it, I would hope that the Reparation Task Force consider how are we looking at the technology from both the capital perspective and from the data and the law algorithms that are so biased against Black folks. So we at Greenlining would argue that the work that needs to be done will have to be done over if there's not a future proactive instead of a reactive look. Right? We want to be sure to say, how do we redress the impact so that our wealth, we can begin to close the wealth gap. I was literally at a meeting with the U.S. Treasury and their chief of staff, and we were talking, and they were saying, well, you know, it's such a big problem that we're just going to try to make everything equitable. I said, no, you just need to work on closing that wealth gap. You just need to take that $1 that white families have and the 8 cents and move that 8 cents to 20 cents. Can you move that 20 cents to 50 cents? And we will be making progress. And I'm talking to the US Treasury, right? And then we were talking to the EPA, and then we were talking to the Department of Transportation to say, work on closing that wealth gap. Well, if y'all do the good work of reparation and closing that wealth gap, we don't want to be sitting here having not put forward proposals that also said, look, technology, this is what they're doing in terms of perpetuating that gap. That reparation will not, the reparation solutions will not close the gap if we're continually allowing technology to widen the gap. So we see our praxis as the intersection between that economic equity, racial equity, and building wealth. And that the third component, though, is actually the climate equity, that there is environmental racism happening as well. So where we live is also been denied resources. Our water is dirtier, our land is dirtier, and our air is dirtier, right? That as you begin to see like billions of dollars being allocated towards climate equity, the Justice 40 initiative is like 40% of those dollars must go to communities of color. And I guarantee you, of that 40%, Black communities represent a disproportionate larger part of those allocation of dollars. So resources are coming, but without a thoughtful racial lens, we will not be able to close this racial wealth gap. So with that, I will close because I'm looking at our time here, and we are available for future questions or any sort of input that you would like from Greenlining. So thank you very much for giving Vincent and I an opportunity to represent to you on the technology front.
Thank you so much, Ms. Deborah Gorman and Mr. Vincent Lay. I truly appreciate both of you and the expert testimony you both have provided. Now we will turn to Dr. Sathyan Noble.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Moore, and the honorable members of the task force. I appear before you today to provide testimony based on our review of the evidence compiled at the University of California, Los Angeles Center for Critical Internet Inquiry. I should also note that I'm a descendant of enslaved Black Americans. My paternal grandmother was born into sharecropping, and she and my grandfather bought many of our relatives out of this de facto system of slavery in Mississippi. And this legacy of slavery is not in the distant past. It entrapped my grandmother in her youth, and I am the direct descendant of that experience. So this legacy informs my knowledge and my work. The task of the Reparations Task Force is not simple. The overlapping complex histories of how, where, and when racial bias, discrimination, and violence have systematically excluded African Americans from wealth creation across the state of California are many. These histories are different for families living in Oakland, in Los Angeles, and in the Central Valley, and yet all are impacted by the business practices and culture of the tech industry. The tech sector has been a big part of the California economy and identity. It brings in an estimated $520 million per year to the California economy and employs roughly 2 million Californians. The explosive growth of this sector has benefited greatly from the talent and resources of our public university systems, as well as public subsidies, government contracts, and an almost entirely unregulated industry that allows companies to use Black communities as test beds for product development and design. This is but one of many dimensions of thinking through repair and restoration. We must also consider the opportunity cost of the lack of tax revenue that the tech sector has largely avoided paying, which otherwise could have funded education, community economic development, affordable housing, and infrastructure. It might be a cliche to invoke Facebook's erstwhile motto, move fast and break things, as a sector-wide indictment, but it is an ideological orientation that excuses the harm caused by this level of real-world experimentation and exploitation as necessary bumps along their road to innovation. The tech sector often positions itself as a nimble solution to large intransigent problems, problems often caused by the kind of discrimination and chronic underfunding that will make up much of the task force's research mandate. Technical solutions are not mitigations of bias or historical injustices by default, and in fact, often exacerbate these effects and make mechanisms for redress more opaque and more difficult to regulate, hidden behind claims of proprietary intellectual property. In short, approaching these problems with more tech is not the answer. Increasing accountability by the tech sector for exacerbating inequality and violations of our digital civil rights as pathways to repair must also be calculated in your research mandate. It is increasingly challenging to extrapolate the effects of technical infrastructure and the tech industry at large from larger social and economic phenomena. It is becoming less and less likely that someone is able to secure a job, access government services, fix their own equipment, manage finances, earn high school and college degrees, communicate and or gain access to information without access to the internet or without some element of algorithmically aided decision-making. It is also increasingly rare that the work of government operates outside of tech sector contracts, tying public services to private interests that do not share long-term commitment to the public good. In my own work, I have highlighted the ways in which racial and gender discrimination are part of the organizing logic of the internet, as users and technologies co-create and form social relations, and I have explored how the business interests of big tech companies are often at odds with the health, wealth, and well-being of African Americans. These technologies and the economic interests behind them are compounding factors, and as such, a substantive analysis of these industries must be part of any meaningful investigation into quantifying the economic consequences of persistent historical structural racism in California. As previous testimony before this task force have shown, systemic and structural racism permeate California's economic, social, and infrastructural systems. You have heard testimony about gentrification, official housing policy, and unofficial practice. You have heard about the long-term effects of infrastructural development that restricts movement, promotes segregation, and displaces communities, and the overrepresentation of African Americans among the unhoused population in California. Technology often allows systems to operate at a much faster speed and at a much higher scale, while also making the ability to intervene, question, or impeach more difficult. We offer here, from our center at UCLA, a non-exhaustive list of areas in which the tech industry has contributed to or benefit from racial bias and discrimination. First, according to the National Academy of Medicine, racial disparities in healthcare persist regardless of income, insurance, and severity of illness. Implicit bias exists across healthcare sectors and is made manifest in the ways in which resources are allocated, the way patients are treated, and sometimes even in the design of medical devices and technologies themselves. For example, at the start of COVID-19 global pandemic, a study emerged pointing out racial bias in pulse oximetry measurement. While their use is not entirely novel, the pandemic also saw a rise in the use of automated resource allocation systems meant to ameliorate the challenges of an overburdened healthcare system. However, there has already been evidence of racial bias in one of the most used commercial healthcare systems. These systems weigh risk factors in order to determine outcomes. They make decisions about treatment and allocate resources. Racial bias and discrimination in these systems guarantees the entrenchment and furthering of racial inequities while making them less visible in the system itself. And we know Black Americans are the most overtaxed by these systems. The growth of social media has been swift and extreme, means by which to do community organizing, share and communicate with friends and family, date, build a business, and find a job. Amnesty International and Element AI launched a project in 2018 that showed African American women as dealing with the most abusive online attacks via social media. This includes personal attacks, professional attacks, physical threats, doxing, and revenge porn, leading to stress and potential financial precarity. Fundamentally, social media's business model is premised on extracting increasingly granular levels of personal data and then generating advertising sales based on gathered data. This extractive model has precipitated a series of crises that disproportionately harm African American communities at scale, including the aforementioned harassment, voter suppression, misinformation related to COVID-19, and seemingly unfettered space for white nationalist violence to foment. Research exploring the persistent effects of experiencing racism online suggests an increased stress level that can contribute to long-term chronic illness and mental health challenges. Tech companies often position themselves as in the vanguard of sustainable technologies and business practices, but the environmental effects of e-waste, shipping and packaging, and energy consumption have never fully been calculated comprehensively with an eye towards historical accountability. E-waste is an exponentially increasing problem of waste management, requiring new protocols and recycling programs to address the risks of introducing a wide range of toxic materials into communities. Lead, mercury, cadmium, and other metallic substances are routinely found in cell phones, computers, and electronic components that are endangering ecosystems and communities. While California has pioneered laws regarding e-waste recycling and management, there is a lack of longitudinal data to illuminate this phenomenon and a lack of accountability aimed at manufacturers and producers rather than consumers. Historically, African American communities have borne the disproportionate brunt of the deleterious effects of proximity to waste and waste management. In addition, technologies such as Bitcoin rely on Bitcoin mining to produce more assets, deepening dependencies on high-powered computing. Bitcoin mining is designed to be resource intensive so as to keep the pace of production steady. Its market controls depend on massive energy consumption. With the meteoric increase in interest in blockchain technologies that provide the foundation for cryptocurrencies as well as the NFT market, we can expect this practice and its environmental impact to follow suit. Across the tech sector, there has been widespread and well-documented underrepresentation of African American workers. The technology sector's estimated worth is in the trillions, with tech sector jobs garnering salaries 30 to 40% above California state median incomes and 4 times median incomes for African American households in California. According to a 2020 Crunchbase report, African American and Latinx entrepreneurs combined raised just 2.6 of the total venture capital funding awarded to company founders in 2020, with one of the report's authors, Marlene Orozco, emphasizing that one issue at the heart of why the existing racial wealth gap is exacerbated by historical gaps in community wealth is combined with the limited exposure and opportunities to secure capital. The tech sector is fast growing and has a high incidence of well-paying jobs, but the disparities in funding and hiring contribute to the persistence of the racial wealth gap. African American employees are often then subject to racism within their workplace, and in some instances pushed out for doing the very work they were hired to do. Reading firsthand accounts create an eerie echo with research that features early African American tech workers. Recurring themes of not belonging and feeling alien recur. Additionally, increased use of AI-assisted hiring programs should give us pause, as instances of racial bias are common in resume filtering and in the technologies that rely on facial recognition. The impact of the tech sector on housing affordability is significant. The tech sector itself has a history of drastically affecting housing affordability in its vicinity without taking surrounding communities into account. In addition, the term digital redlining has been used to describe two distinct phenomena. First, internet service providers, or ISPs, resist extending high-speed broadband into communities they do not consider potentially returning on infrastructural investment. This has far-reaching consequences, depressing access to avenues of economic opportunity, opportunities to civic engagement, access to government service, and access to education. Second, digital redlining also refers to the implementation of algorithmic systems that further predatory loan practices, surveillance advertising, and discriminatory housing practices. Instead of ameliorating bias or discriminatory practices, these products and practices exacerbate them at scale. African American students face discrimination in all levels of education. There is extensive research on the ways in which increased surveillance, increased discipline, and suspensions contribute to the school-to-prison pipeline. The ed tech industry has positioned itself to address these as well as many other longstanding issues within the education system through gathering and processing training data and developing products that privilege learning personalization and promise early warning signs to promote prevention. However, this is not isolated to so-called ed tech, but permeates education. As in the industries discussed throughout, elements of algorithmically aided decision-making can be found across all sectors of education. One example, Todd Feather's investigation for the markup found that major universities use race as a high-impact predictor of student success, an element that both at the individual level and in the aggregate can dictate student access to resource. But the role of the tech industry is not isolated to enabling or precluding access to resources for individual students, but rather represents a larger phenomenon by which technology attracts and retains more resources for itself. Programs promoting technical literacy and procurement programs often divert much needed resources away from teacher-student education, away from investment in Black students, and further entrench students and their families into agreements with companies that compromise their privacy and may lead to other deleterious effects that require further study. It is difficult to overstate the role of tech companies in the shaping of the contemporary policing and the broader prison industrial complex. The introduction of predictive policing programs, big data programs for resource allocation, algorithmic sentencing and bail programs, surveillance technologies, forensic science and technology applications, police-worn body cameras, so-called non-lethal weapons, monitoring technologies, records management, license plate readers, etc., has transformed the way policing is done, and each and every one has had racial bias at the core of their development and implementation. Investment in technical solutions across the criminal justice system is not novel, as systems of automation and large-scale cross-system data management tools dates back to the 1970s. We are also seeing automation in background checks, facial recognition regulating building access, and a variety of unregulated AI that is beta tested on Black communities. Each of these types of carceral technology are unfairly pointed at vulnerable Black people, which are often in our neighborhoods across the state. So to sum up in closing, let me just say that California is central to the origin story of the tech industry, and so it must be understood as a powerful element in California history. We encourage considering the tech sector as an integral part of the task force's study, as it is crucial to hold companies accountable for building corporate and individual wealth through data extraction, instruments that perpetuate racial bias, and discriminatory business practices. These new and novel systems are often built on top of pre-existing structures and institutions, use data sets that are imbued with patterns and traditions of structural racism, and often replicate structures and institutions that have long and complex histories of racial injustice. African Americans have always been users of and advocates for technology. often creating new businesses, platforms, and strategies to carve out space for fostering joy, mutual aid, connection, strategy, and wealth. We implore you to recommend long-term funding to the state legislature as part of your mandate, such that longitudinal studies into the issues we have raised here today could help us realize restoration and repair for historical discrimination by and through the technology sector. I provide this testimony and I'm grateful to the support and research from my colleague at the UCLA Center for Critical Internet Inquiry, Dr. Stacy Wood. We hope that the review of this evidence will work in service of restoration and repair for Black Americans and the broader public good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Noble, for your expert testimony. So now we have 5 minutes reserved for questions from our esteemed task force members. And so I would like to provide space now for any of our task force members if they have any questions or comments or insights based on the information presented today. And I'll actually, oh, sorry, Vice Chair Brown, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, members of the task force, I just want to commend all of our presenters who've given such factual, eloquent, and moving testimonies. A lot of us might have already been aware of this, but to hear this collective statement, where again, across the board, it boils down to our not being viewed as being human. We've been excluded, mistreated, and that's more reason why we should look at spending a lot of our energy lobbying to make sure that the right things are done to right the wrongs and to pay up for the egregious wrongs that have been perpetrated against African Americans. So thank you so much for our staff, the Department of Justice, and Madam Chair for the leadership you've given. Let us just hold our holt and with pit bulldog determination, state the case and follow through.
Thank you so much for that, Vice Chair Brown. I had a question, and it's related to tech companies. So there is a diversity analytics company named Blendor that did a report on the different pledges from these different tech companies after the George Floyd uprisings. And Blendor counted 535 pledges from different tech companies worth $4.56 billion. And those pledges were made by these tech companies between January 1st and December 31st, 2020. But the report revealed that these tech companies that made these Black Lives Matter pledges or statements have also 20% fewer Black employees on average than companies that did not make similar pledges and statements. And the report also concluded that there's little evidence of tangible progress overall, despite this $4.56 billion worth of pledges made by these different companies. And so I guess my question is to, the experts on the panel, who may or may not, have, stayed up to date with some of these pledges with these tech companies. What are your opinions on these pledges, on the progress of these tech companies in acknowledging, anti-Black discrimination? If y'all have any thoughts or insight on that, I would love to hear that.
To speak up if none of my colleagues want to. I think what we know and what we have evidence of is that the tech sector broadly, at least in terms of the largest tech companies, the major actors that have been noted previously, are duplicitous at best in their pledges to support Black people and to kind of jump into the opportunity for public relations gestures. But in reality, when we look at across the board at their employment numbers of Black Americans, Black Californians, when we look at their corporate tax evasion, and of course, the tremendous impact that this has on communities, when California companies do not pay taxes, it creates a disproportionate burden for educational services, healthcare services, all of the things that we need for the state to thrive. That burden is felt most acutely among poor people and Black people. So I think we have to kind of look systemically at the relationship between the pledges and then the corporate practice and corporate behaviors. And where I would point the task force to would be the level of taxation on these companies. Do they pay their fair share? Their use of the public infrastructure, the roads, the airports, the schools, their hiring from schools in California, from universities in California, and of course their negative impacts on affordable housing, and of course what this does to the under Prop 13 to the funding of public education.
I think you might have went out. I think Dr. Noble went out. So we'll go to.
Cannot compare.
Thank you. So I see Deborah, Gorman, and then Vincent Lay.
Yeah, real quick, I would also, reinforce what Dr. Noble just said, but there can't be accountability without some transparency. So I would just offer that the CRA, which is a federal regulatory, the Community Reinvestment Act, helps us hold banks accountable because there's a transparency that they have to report the amount of investment that they're doing in communities. So at Greenlining, we're allowed to call a bank in and point to the data, and because we have a regulation on file that allows us that leverage, and that regulation is supported by the Federal Reserve, the OCC, and the FDIC. Right, so there's some teeth in order to have the accountability because we can collect the data and we can disaggregate it. So that's what we need that for companies, right? We just need to be able to say, and this is the heavy lift, it's permissible to collect the data and then analyze it and hold you accountable to these goals and these sort of, hashtag beyond the statement. I would say that, this whole conversation around data, it continues so that the data goes both ways, help us analyze to create good policies and remove disparate impact and disparate impact and outcomes, but also to hold folks accountable in those companies. So then I can say, you said 4.5 billion, we looked at the number, it was 20 million. But without the data and without a way of having that transparency and that accountability, I'm not sure we can get there. Vincent?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, in California, we have the supplier diversity report card. Utilities are required to report their procurement with minority-owned businesses, as stated in the legislation. And really, no one looks at it except for Greenlining, and we grade them on their performance. And I think that kind of grading, that kind of oversight, where people are actually held to their promises, so that blend door report is the type of stuff that we need to be doing to make sure folks are living up to their commitments. And I just want to flag that, when we talk about algorithmic regulation, we're already getting a lot of companies coming in and say, oh, don't regulate us. We have our policy and we state in our policy that we have these ethical considerations. So as long as we follow our policy, then you shouldn't go in and regulate us any more than that. And that's the talking points right now for algorithmic regulation. So, taking the example from these diversity and inclusion statements and pledges and hearing what they're trying to do for algorithmic regulation and oversight, I want to be really aware that these pledges aren't going to mean anything and these policies are just cop-outs. So I do think we need some accountability from oversight bodies.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Noble, Deborah, Gorman, and Vincent Lay. Are there any, we are over time, so I want to reserve the space for any last comments or questions from our esteemed task force members. Senator Bradford, you're recognized.
Thank you, and I appreciate the presenters and their information. I just want to respond to the fact that comment that was just made that there's no oversight. The legislature requires an annual update on what he referred to, greenlining GO General Order 156, which was started 35 years ago by the late Gwen Moore. And since I've come to the legislature, we've expanded upon that to not only deal with the utility space, but the insurance space, the cannabis space, and as well as have annual updates as to the level of participation. And sadly, those numbers have increased as far as spend, but what we found out instead of with truly minority-owned companies, those which was once white male controlled are now controlled by their wives or their daughters now, and that's how that spend has increased. But yes, the legislature, we monitor that. It's important that we continue to monitor that, and we've tried to expand upon, again, General Order 156 to make sure that they live up to the commitment that they've made. So, and I would just comment again, great information and just personal story. My first job out of college was with IBM. I was a marketing rep selling technology in the 80s. And I was given the most shitty, I'm just going to say that, territory to try to sell technology, where my white counterparts were given Beverly Hills, Century City, things of that nature. And I was given commerce, downtown, industrial areas where they weren't interested in technology 35 years ago. So that discrimination went on then, and it's still going on now in the marketing space as well. So thank you.
I think I've been recognized. I can't really hear Chair Moore. But yeah, your message landed very loud and clear about the importance of transparency and the importance of, having transparent data so we can use that data to monitor how these technologies are being used to replicate inequality. That landed very strongly on me. The other question I want to ask, though, is about the importance of representation, of having diversity and representation in the technology field, right? In the STEM world. And the fact is that in the top 10 companies, the top 10 tech companies, there are almost no Black women employed, zero. And having representation is its own form of oversight, right? So as far as, the programs that we are considering in terms of reparations, what role should improving representation in tech play in our thought process?
Well, let me jump in here. When we are using, especially like GO56 or the CRA to hold, let me just use banks accountable, we actually ask for their diversity of their board, diversity of their leadership, the diversity of their supplier, the diversity of their philanthropy, right? Because they all have a foundation that they try to do work through instead of doing it on the corporate side. So that is one of the key ways to actually get a different perspective at the table. So it's included when we speak so broadly, the diversity that we're looking for, it starts at and sort of works its way through the organization. And then we also look at, the products and services. What's that diversity look like? I think we've been talking a lot about the products and services that are manifested through these companies, but we also are talking about the organizational structures and then the policies and practices that they have. So it's a broad umbrella, and when we issue these reports, we're kicking through all of that. And I think, frankly, you're going to see the backlash, because we get quite a bit of backlash, and we're going to see this backlash when we try to put a Black woman on the Supreme Court. You're going to hear the arguments. You're going to see the arguments that is the trope that is being used by corporate America. And so I'm really fascinated to see how we try to position whichever Black woman is put forward and the shortcomings thereof, because I think that's exactly how corporate America will be looking at it.
I can add. Thank you for that question. Oh, are you going to go ahead, Chair Moore? Okay, I'll add very quickly. I know we're over time. I think for us at Data for Black Lives, we obviously think about pipelines into tech jobs and what does that look like for young Black people. But I think so much of it does start with math education. And one group that we work closely with is the Journey for Justice Alliance. It's an alliance of over 40 organizations across the country. A lot of these people a lot of the leaders of this movement find their lineage in descendants of slaves, and they did an amazing report that showed the different course offerings based on schools, based on districts, based on neighborhood. And it was startling to see where they're offering advanced math courses and where they're not. And then I think from there, making sure that there are pathways and opportunity, not just expensive boot camps, but actual opportunities for folks to actually get the skills to be able to join these jobs. And then, of course, pushing back on big tech companies to hire, not in a tokenizing way, but also to hire at the C-suite level. And part of our fight at Data for Black Lives is to ensure that's done, and it's not just lip service, because has been a lot of lip service. People can give donations, but it's hard to give up power and decision-making power in particular.
Member Montgomery Stepp, you had a question? You're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Moore. I'll try to be as quick as possible because Ms. Gorman brought up the Community Reinvestment Act. And at the local level, I serve on a reinvestment task force that is directly tied to that act. And what we find is that we have to do the reports, and we receive the reports. And there's sort of this period of time where after we receive the reports, there's this finger wagging, like you guys aren't doing enough. And so then it becomes, the banks get together and say, let's do more, sort of in the form of charity or different programs, but it doesn't turn out to be real accountability or systemic change. And so I guess my question is, I think the model is something we can build a foundation of, but how do we build accountability into that model where we can measure it as opposed to, making these big tech companies, banks feel bad and then using the pressure tactics to get them to do more, and there's no real systemic change. And that's for any of our presenters.
Ms. Noble, do you think you can answer that question and maybe the question that was asked before?
Sure. I think one of the probably most important ways that we should be thinking about the tech sector's business models is to just remember that the Black people are involved in the tech sector significantly. It is true that Black women are not represented, and there's a lot that has to do with not the lack of Black women's preparation. In many cases, in the senior management positions and in software engineering in particular, only about 5 top schools in the United States, top CS departments, serve as the pipeline. If Black women are not in the pipeline coming out of programs in those schools, and those are mostly Stanford, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Illinois, and Berkeley, then Black women will not get hired, Black people will not get hired into those kinds of jobs. So the part of the challenge here is that we have a tremendous number. In fact, Jessica Gwynn from USA Today, the technology editor there, did a very important investigative journalism piece a few years ago that showed that there are many Black people in the pipeline for computer science and software engineering jobs, but they are at San Jose State. They are at universities that the elite computer science and engineering leadership in Silicon Valley will not hire from. So we want to ask ourselves about this kind of relationship, the structural relationship between particular universities outside the state of California and inside the state of California, the tenuous relationship, of course, between preparing a workforce of Black people in California, which typically would happen in the University of California and the CSU systems, but those systems are profoundly defunded, quite frankly, by the lack of tax revenue that does not come in from the tech sector. So we want to understand these like as a systems problem, I think, and not put this back on the burden that Black women themselves are not prepared. Far from it. They're actually facing discrimination at every level of preparation and a lack of support and funding. So that's an important point to make. I think, the broader issues, maybe I've tried to kind of address here in that. I think that if I would just implore the task force to truly think about the relationship between taxation, the relationship between redlining and gentrification. All of these things are connected to each other. And again, over and over, you see Black people disproportionately harmed. We want to remember that these issues that we've raised about data and algorithms include things like the gamification of financial markets that led, of course, to the 2008 recession, which was the largest wipeout of Black wealth in the history of the United States. So this is what I think, our colleagues at the Greenlining Institute and other organizations are really helping us understand how to quantify those losses. We're talking about all of the gains for Black Americans, the gains from Reconstruction and the gains of the Civil Rights Movement effectively wiped out in the 2008 recession. That is a significant issue. And of course, you can look here in Los Angeles, where I am, at communities like Baldwin Hills and East LA, part of East LA, South Central LA, and you can see the massive gentrification, the loss of Black policies and public policies that we have in place that are really exacerbating and compounding these issues.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Noble, Vincent Lay, Deborah Gorman, and Yeshi Milner. We greatly appreciate all the insight and expert testimony provided, and we are looking forward to staying connected with you all as our work progresses and develops. So thank you again. So now,
committee.
Thank you. So we will now turn to our next agenda item, potential action item, expert consultants for the second report. And we will be hearing from the Department of Justice Research Center. So without further ado, the Department of Justice may present.
Here more, this is Aisha. I will check with Trini. I think we might have to promote the speaker from attendee.
I just did. I just did.
Perfect. Thank you, Trini.
Hello. Good day, esteemed members of the AB 3121 Task Force. I'm Dr. Tiffany Jantz-DeZamo, and I serve as a research supervisor at the California Department of Justice Research Center. I'm here to provide a brief update regarding the expert economic consultants for your second report. As you know, on the second day of the December 2021 public hearing, the task force directed the Department of Justice to reach out to Professor Sandy Darity to gauge his interest and availability in convening a team of economists to address subsections E, how reparations are to be calculated, and subsection F, the instrumentalities for reparation distribution, of Section 3, Government Code 8301.1, which was instituted by Assembly Bill 3121. During this conversation and subsequent conversations, members of the task force requested the DOJ reach out to a number of economists and scholars to gauge interest in participating in a consulting group to address subsections E and F. The DOJ Research Center got to work immediately, reaching out and engaging in conversations with requested economic scholars over the course of December and January. We were able to contact all scholars requested by task force members. Of the scholars we contacted, we are pleased to inform the task force that the following scholars have expressed interest in and potential availability for contributing to a collaborative economics consulting team. Professor Sandy Darity from Duke University, Professor Bill Spriggs from Howard University, Professor Thomas Kramer from the University of Connecticut, Professor Kesia Campbell from Pierce College in California, and folklorist and author Kirsten Mullen. The task force's direction, the department can issue letters of retention for the aforementioned scholars and request that they work on a scope of work proposal that covers a general approach or multiple approaches to addressing subsections E and F of Government Code 8301.1 on behalf of the task force, along with providing a timeline of deliverables. The scope of work would of course need to be presented, discussed, and voted on in a future meeting of the task force. And so in order to help develop the scope of work, the task force suggests that, or the department suggests that the task force consider designating one member of the task force or creating an advisory committee of 2 task force members to work with the department and the economics consulting group to coordinate this effort. Thank you for your time. We look forward to your continued direction and any questions you might have.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive update. We have 10 minutes until lunch, and so I will leave this space for task force members to ask any questions, provide any comments or insights based on the information that we just received. We can also have a conversation as to Tiffany's suggestion, right, as to whether we want to, appoint one member or create an advisory committee that will work alongside these teams of economists if we decide to approve them. And so I guess as direction, I'm sure there's going to be a motion on the floor to approve these teams of economists, and then a second motion to choose 1 or 2 members to serve as a spokesperson or coordinator. And so I'll just repeat the names that Tiffany just mentioned. So Bill Spriggs or William Spriggs, he was one of our expert witnesses at our panel, at our hearing in October. And so was Thomas Kramer, Kesia Campbell, and then of course Sandy Darity and Kristen Mullen. Do y'all have any comments or about these people in particular? If not, I think in the interest of time, we can just put the motions on the floor and move the agenda along. Member Grills, you're recognized. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, Member Grills, you're recognized.
Thank you. I just want to get some clarification. So is the recommendation for us to consider a team, and this team would consist of Darity, Spriggs, Kramer, Campbell, and Mullins? Or is it that all of them are being considered for a decision to be made about one of them and then one of them pulling together a team? I'm not clear.
That for Member Grills.
Yes, the recommendation was based on the direction we had received in in December, which was to create a collaborative team. That is the inquiry that we sent to the scholars listed, whether they would be interested in participating in a collaborative team. And that is the inquiry to which they responded in the affirmative. So it would be a team of scholars. At this point, we can receive direction to have letters of retention, which can precede a formal contract in the event that you decide to reject the scope of work at a later date. We can cease to move forward with the contracting process. Alternatively, we can move forward with the contracting process if you would like.
And so the people that are listed here are all economists, with the exception of Kirsten Mullins?
The people who are mentioned here are mostly economists. I will note that Professor Thomas Kramer is a professor of public policy and his training is in political science. Though he has some experience calculating reparations, as you saw in the testimony. And then Kirsten Mullen, as you noted, is not an economist. She is a folklorist and author.
And so what are we using as criteria for qualifying to be part of a panel of economists, and we have people who don't have a background in economics? I can see the argument for Professor Kramer, but I'm unclear about for Mrs. Mullen.
Yes,
If I could,
go ahead, sorry.
I'm sorry, if I could interject. Member Grills, my understanding is that the names that were offered in this group were offered by members of the task force. So ultimately, the task force would determine, based on the qualifications and these individuals, whether they choose to issue retention letters to those individuals to be part of this collaborative team. So I think that's kind of the genesis of why these people were selected. They were selected by one or more individuals from the task force.
And then for this group of for this economics panel of folks, is there someone who will be designated as like the lead person who's organizing the entire process that they're going to undertake?
I believe that, and that this kind of goes to part two of what the options that you're presented with today. If there's an advisory committee formed from the task force, then you all can make that decision and even designate which of the individuals who you choose to retain should serve in that capacity.
I know that the DOJ, vetted the list of economists that we provided to evaluate their interests and to figure out who wants to be a part of this panel. Are there any of the potential candidates that we're still waiting to hear from, that their response is outstanding?
Yes, there were two candidates who we reached out to who have not responded yet, despite a couple of attempts to reach out to them. One is Professor Logan and Professor Trayvon Logan. I will note that he had responded to a previous inquiry in an earlier round of searches and noted that he did not have the availability to participate, but he has not responded to the most recent inquiry. The other person is Professor Damon Jones. He has an automated email response noting that he is conducting some work, I believe, on behalf of the federal government, so he may be slow to respond. So he has yet to respond as well and may not be available.
Madam Chair.
Vice Chair Brown, you're recognized.
What is our specific need at this juncture? Are we trying to find an economist or economists give us input regarding the economics of reparations? I think we should make the decision on the basis of what we need.
So just to again clarify to Dr. Brown's point, this team has been tasked with satisfying sections E and F, which again detail how reparations will be calculated and the instrumentalities of how reparations would be distributed. So those are the two questions that this team will be tasked to answer. To your point, that could include, economists obviously would be required to be part of that group, but to the extent that there are other voices that would be able to weigh in on how not just the calculation, but the distribution part of it as well. That may factor in to the ability to present this second report. But again, that is the collective decision of this body to make that determination.
Well, Madam Chair.
Yes, you're recognized, Vice Chair Brown.
We have two tasks. One is to determine the economics of reparations, and two, whom do we deem worthy of receiving? Now, if they're going to speak to those issues, that's where we need to be scratched, where we're itching. And that question has not been determined.
Right, exactly. So as Damon alluded to in the AB 3121 legislative bill text, it provides that the task force has to ascertain, in consideration of our findings, any form of compensation to African Americans, with a special consideration for African Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States is calculated. And in addition to that, we must also, ascertain what form of compensation should be awarded, through what instrumentalities, and who should be eligible for such compensation. And so the economic consultant or economic consultant team would be tasked with assisting the task force with ascertaining those 2 points. So it seems as if what's on the floor is, and please clarify, Tiffany or Damon, that we, either vote to send out letters of retention for these people that you identified, and or did you say instead of just sending out letters of retention, we could vote to just contract with them without sending that letter? Is that what I heard? If not, please correct me if I'm wrong. Wanted to make clear what the recommendations are from the research office.
Yes, to clarify, the option presented originally was to approve retention letters going to the aforementioned scholars. An alternative option is to approve moving forward with the contracting process before the scope of work is presented. The original proposal was the letters of retention, and then following the presentation of a scope of work, the task force could decide if they'd like to move forward with a contract and approve the scope of work. Did that answer your question?
Yes. So I just would like to ask another follow-up question, just so I'm clear. So there's 2 alternatives. It's either we vote to send out letters of retention to the aforementioned scholars, wait for them to come up with the scope of work, they'll come back, and then we approve it or we don't approve it. And then the other alternative is kind of skipping sending out the letter of retention, voting to hire the aforementioned scholars before we see a scope of work? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'll note that I am a researcher and not an attorney, so letters of retention may still be issued. The second alternative is you voting to move forward with a contracting process before seeing the scope of work. So I believe that we would advise on the former option, where you vote to provide retention letters and then decide if you'd like to move forward with this group of scholars following a successful presentation of the scope of work. That ultimately is the task force's decision.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Vice Chair Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you. Should we not look at first, as good stewards of our time and this enterprise, that we would come up with what we feel should be the scope first, and let them know we're hiring them, what we're looking for.
If I may, Chair Moore, to Dr. Brown's point, if the task force authorizes the issuance of the retention letters, the advisory committee that we are suggesting would be helpful, comprised of members of the task force, would work with these experts in developing the scope of work. My understanding is that they already have questions concerning the scope of work, and that the answers to those questions can only come from you all. And so it would be a collaborative process that the task force would work directly with the experts on defining the scope of work that satisfies the two subsections that we referenced earlier about the calculation and the distribution of reparations.
Yeah.
Member Holder, you're recognized.
Yeah, this is such a foundational, critical issue. Number one, I don't think that we should have a advisory council or single person from the task force figuring out what the scope of work is. Because this goes to all of the most critical issues that we need to decide as a body representing different points of view. So I don't accept that recommendation. The other thing, I have a great deal of discomfort with the limited number of experts who we have options for to be on this panel. I do think in terms of calculating, which is going to be the critical work of this panel, it needs to be economists. It needs to be a group of economists with expertise in doing this sort of quantifying and calculating operation. And I also have discomfort with the fact that some of the folks who have been selected as potential people for this panel are coming to that body with sort of a prejudgment about how reparations should be distributed and to whom it should be distributed. And I'm just being very transparent about my discomfort about that, because I think in terms of who is eligible for reparations, that is for the task force to decide. And I am not comfortable with having economists or experts who already have a strong opinion or strong prejudgment about that.
Member Holder, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, Madam Chair, I wanted to give her some information. My screen keeps going off. You can make a motion based on what you're asking for, and then the members can act accordingly to your motion by either seconding the motion, having discussion with respect to your concerns, and then moving on that. That's just one option that you have at this moment.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Member Holder, I didn't want you to be cut off. Were you speaking? And then we'll go to Vice Chair Brown.
Well, if I was going to craft a motion right now, it would be a motion around giving us time to specifically discuss the points that I just made regarding the sufficiency of the individuals identified for this panel, and regarding regarding using economists or experts who are coming to that task with a sort of pre-judgment and set of notions about the community of eligibility and whether there's a conflict of interest there. So I would move to just have to make space for a discussion on those points.
Madam Chair, before we get a motion, please, let's back up. We were to, as a task force, based on our knowledge, our involvement in this state, come up with a sensible, logical, reasonable statement of the harm that's been done. That's our task. Then number two, you do have to have the practitioners, the experts, to work with us on the howness in terms of giving relief for this harm. You will need economists. And the other issue is who is to be considered for reparations. And that's to be done through democratic process of this task force. It appears to me that's our task, or else we get bogged down here.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, Member Holder has placed a motion on the floor, and and you have to entertain her motion as to whether or not it will be seconded and then discussed and voted on.
Thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. That's what I was going to do, to carry the motion. Can you please restate the motion? I wrote it down. So basically the motion on the floor is to set out time to discuss these points of whether to approve retention letters, and the discussion will talk about the sufficiency of the individuals identified, and a discussion on using economic experts in them coming into the work with any prejudgments, and whether that constitutes a conflict of interest. Does that encapsulate your motion, Member Holder? If not, I would just respectfully ask you to restate it so that we can move the conversation along.
I think that sufficiently encapsulates the motion. I can try and tighten it up a little bit, but the bottom line is the motion is to have to do a deeper dive into the 5 individuals that have been identified as the potential panel, and whether any or all of those individuals could potentially have a conflict of interest in terms of carrying out the task force's directives in terms of the scope of work.
Is there a second?
A second.
So it has been properly moved and seconded to have a discussion where we do a deeper dive on the 5 individuals identified by the California Department of Research and whether these individuals, any or all of them, have a conflict of interest that might impede on the task force directives. Is there any discussion on the matter? And just, yes. I'll just start off
Chair
the
Moore,
discussion by saying,
can I add a few
yeah,
things?
go ahead, Member Devine. Go ahead.
So
You're right.
again, this is just thinking out loud with the task force and not taking a position one way or the other. It just seems that there's enough uncertainty that further discussion seems to be in order. To know more about where the candidates, how they might respond to some of these questions, I think would be good. I think it would be also good, Dr. Jans, to know who was asked and then who declined. You didn't present that part. So I think we just need a fuller, Lisa talked about a deeper dive in the analysis of this. And in the process, I think the discussion will come out about what Dr. Brown says about the class of eligibility, because it's necessarily connected to that. So if the motion amounts to let's set aside the time necessary to make sure that we've got the right experts who will be objective enough and expert enough to serve the task force in terms of what their directives are. I think if I'm understanding the motion, that seems to make some sense to me.
I have a parliamentary procedural question for Parliamentarian Johnson. So is it possible for us to kind of reserve the balance of this discussion after the motion to unfinished business tomorrow? Or would this have to be, itemized as an agenda item for our next hearing? And
Well, this item is set for action. So it is it's part of the presentation. It says possible action. So you're in order to take action. And as such, you can defer it to unfinished business tomorrow, because it's already it's on the agenda with respect to the presentation that was made. As it's agendized, it says with possible action. So if that's what you prefer to do, you can
have. Okay, thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson, for that. Vice Chair Brown, you're recognized. I just want to be mindful that we're 17 minutes into the lunch hour. So, Vice Chair Brown.
I would move that we take.
But there's a motion on the floor already. Sorry, you're going out. I didn't hear you.
I give substitute motion that we move to put this item on the agenda tomorrow for action.
Okay, you want to, Mr. Vice Chair, you want to just table it until the time certain. So you can move to table it until unfinished business. And you don't have to, no discussion, you just vote on the table and move on.
Okay.
Okay, so that way it takes precedence over any other motion. Just move the table.
Yeah, I move the table until tomorrow. Right.
Okay. Okay, is there a second? Okay, it's been properly moved and seconded.
It's just, you just vote on it, okay?
Okay, so Parliamentarian Johnson, may you please cue a roll call vote?
Yes, Madam Chair, we're voting on the motion to table it to a time certain tomorrow at unfinished business. Your vote, Madam Chair?
Aye.
Madam Chair votes aye. Vice Chair Brown.
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown votes aye. Member Bradford.
Aye.
Member Bradford votes aye. Member Grills.
Aye.
Member Grills votes aye. Member Holder. Member Holder.
Aye.
Oh, okay. Member Jones Sawyer. Okay. Member Lewis.
Aye.
Member Lewis votes aye. Member Tamaki.
Aye.
Member Tamaki votes aye. Member Montgomery Stepp.
Aye.
Member Montgomery Stepp votes aye. Madam Chair, 8 members voted. There were 8 ayes, no nays.
Thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. There are 8 ayes and 0 nays. So the aye has it and the motion carries. We will continue this discussion tomorrow under the unfinished business portion. Okay, so it is 12:20. Thank you all, members of the public and esteemed task force members, for your patience. So we will reconvene back at 1 p.m. for the discussion on community of eligibility with our esteemed guest, Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Weber. Thank you.
What's up, family? Thank you so much for tuning in. It looks like we're at break. This is a hot mess right here. This is a hot mess right here that I'm going to have to address in my comments tomorrow. Ms. Holder is sitting up here claiming that she doesn't want people sitting in the space of determining the outcome, the economic, the cash repair, and all the other goodies that we are entitled to and overdue. She wants to sit up here and talk against their strong opinion about who should be the recipients when she too, as well as Dr. Grills, have strong opinions, strong Pan-Africanist opinions that the very Africans who sold us into slavery, whose incomes are twice that of ours, if not 3, 4, 5, 6 times as much as ours, whose wealth position is at least, at the bare minimum since 2014, 300 times more wealthy than us. They've got strong opinions surrounding Pan-Africanists, Africans and Caribbean people who chose to migrate into the very Jim Crow country. They've got very strong opinions about them being able to receive the reparations Freedmen are long overdue. We are the Black immigrants' reparations. They didn't stay in their countries to fight their Holocaust. They came into this country after we fought for ours. And they've been benefiting all the way to being complicit in us as freedmen whose ancestors built this country and all the wealth they eat from with their lives. They are complicit with our government, with our corporations, and seeking to tether us to the bottom of this country's Titanic as the anchor of its capitalism. And like I told one of the trolls, because the trolls are coming for me now, you see. That's because we're gaining in attention and we're gaining traction. Okay? They're coming for me, and that's okay, because I'm blocking them and giving them the business. I let them know the reparations train for freedmen has left the station. And because this country is designed in a capitalistic way that requires a bottom caste, it's now time for one of the immigrant groups or the poor whites, I don't give a damn, to eat this L that we've been eating on since over 500 years ago when we were dragged here against our will. So my comments tomorrow morning are going to be lit because the economists that are coming to this table have to take instruction, okay, from the task force as to who they ultimately decide will be the benefactors of freedmen reparations. So for her to make much ado about nothing is to try and get Pan-Africanist economists that are going to come in here and help her and Grills, who is now allegedly a paid commissioner for NARC, all of which I am exposing tomorrow morning. They want people that are going to side with their agenda. I believe our ideology is diametrically opposed. I believe to be a paid commissioner on the very NARC who locks us out of access to our HR 40 reparations table will not sit with the grassroots, will not incorporate our edits, wants to be paid $1 bazillion to study when they could just take what we've done, right, family? They could take what we've done and use it as a blueprint to just direct deposit and cut the checks. So for me, it is a conflict of interest, and she should recuse herself from this process, in my humble opinion. So as Ms. Holder expresses concerns about the economist bias, I'm going to express concern about Dr. Grills being an alleged paid commissioner on the board of NARC who has locked us out of access to the HR 40 table. Oh, it will be said in tomorrow morning's comments. Let me see what else y'all got to say before I close us out for a little break. Welcome to the live, one and all. Please like, share, subscribe, turn on your notifications. I can't see you, Facebook, in the chat. I can't see you, Twitter, in the chat. If you want to be seen and recognized and for me to make comments, please chat and screw to. Okay, let's get the algorithms up, family. I know it's a rough time because many freedmen are at work while we're trying to get this simulcast out. So it impacts the numbers, but folks tend to watch later, which is cool. But let me address any comments I see in here, in particular, some that I was making. Okay, so Danielle Winton said, yes, Angela, you're getting so good you even beat that 3-minute time restriction. Your comments were power-packed. Yes, indeed. You got to listen to the top of the show where I finally mastered unmuting my mic so that you guys can hear my comments in my thread. Lord, it only took a bazillion meetings for me to finally figure out my mic has to be unmuted while I share the screen. I can do this seamlessly and effortlessly when it's my own broadcast, but for some reason, I get a little frazzled. I don't think it's for some reason. I'm at work. I'm at work in the courts, managing my court calendar. I was at trial this morning while I'm managing back and forth with you, my illustrious co-host, in the chat. I thank you so much for your comments. But yes, so I finally got it down. I mean, I work on these comments to squeeze them down to 3 minutes for hours. I will probably be up all night crafting my response for tomorrow, because it's hard when you're born to talk to cram all of what you know and what you got to say about it in 3 minutes. But tomorrow's going to be lit after Holder's comments. I'm coming for Narcan and Cobra tomorrow. You don't want to miss it, family. Now listen, if there's ever a time you don't hear me comment, because I'm first in the queue. So Mickey Thickies have been playing around. Today, there was somebody new moderating. I'm always first in the queue because I come on early. The early bird gets the worm. But I've seen them play around with me being in the queue and going over the river and through the woods to call on anybody but me. Like I don't see the puckery. But if you don't ever hear me comment, it's because I'm now being censored. They don't like my comments, y'all. But you ain't got to like it, but you damn sure got to live with it. If I've got to live with your institutional systemic racism and your oppressive boot on the neck of the majority of my people, you're going to have to deal and suffer through my 3-minute comment. Like my comrade over here said, stop all them freaking pleasantries. If they gonna cut me off for anything, cut off my salutations. I come in guns a-blazing. Ain't nobody got time for that. I got to get everything of what I'm thinking and feeling in 450 words. Do you know that is an exercise of exponential proportion for someone like me who was born to talk? I just have to laugh at my damn self. So let's move on. I'm going to get through these comments because we got the part 2. I got to get that set up for when we come back from break. Let's see here. African American Nationalist Party, I see you, fam. Thank you for joining the live. Lineage First. Is this ADOS? Is this guy ADOS? Okay. Someone made a comment. And Lineage First is asking, was that gentleman ADOS? I don't care who he was. His comments were fire. I don't care if you're a black immigrant as long as you coming into space talking sense about what freedmen are owed specifically. And so he did that, so I don't really care who he was. Now let me explain. We are moving towards our true identity in this country that has been hidden from us. We have gone from mulatto to color to Negro to black to African American to American descendants of slavery to American descendants of chattel slavery to Bad Ox to B1 to FDA. Let me help you understand. None of those terms are written in the Constitution where our justice claim is concerned. These white folks have allowed us to play identity acrobat, identity aerobics, so that they can continue. They don't think enough of us to finally figure out we are freedmen. And the way Nigeria is Nigerian and the way that Haitians are Haitians, we are freedmen. And that is designed as Black American descendants of U.S. chattel slavery. So Black American descendants of U.S. chattel slavery is the definition of a freedman. So y'all need to get on code because you ain't got no justice coming with all them other names they've been masking all of our reparations with. If you want to get more exclusive, we are American freedmen because some of the Indian groups are called freedmen too. We are American freedmen, okay? So the trolls have been busy. I dealt with that already. I block them as I see them, family. I mean, I'm managing between work and these lives, so I don't catch them right away, but they hotter than fish grease that we have awakened to our true identity and our true justice claim, and that critical mass is building for this. That's why I televise these task force hearings, because like one of the gentlemen said, all over the country, they're pretending to do reparations. Well, if you don't have access to these meetings the way Narcan and Cobra is blocking us out of HR 40, that's not true reparations. That's going to be empty as the day is long. And they're going to find ways to crowbar Black immigrants into that repair that they are not owed. They fled their Holocaust and they piggybacked over top of us for advancements in this country that we yet know not of. So please trust and believe, if you can't be up in the meetings, if you can't make a comment, that's not true reparations. They're doing things to undermine you behind closed doors. Akin to the HR 40 that wants to pay Congress, who we already pay, $12 million down payment to study. These people on this task force ain't being paid that kind of money to study and put together proposals for the governor. Why should we pay Congress, who is already paid $12 million? Okay, Sheila Jackson Lee won't take a meeting with us because she and Narc and Cobra have put the gate up around freedmen reparations. Most of them migrate from other countries, you see. That's the grift. And so, yeah, they got damn near 200 signatures. Why? There's nothing in it for freedmen. And if something materializes for freedmen, it is Narc and Cobra's intent to manage that. So we'd have to go through Pan-Africanists to get what we're owed, is the way they're setting up HR 40 on. That's the federal reparations program, you see. And we've got two of them over here on the task force fighting for the very thing HR 40 is fighting on behalf of Black immigrants whose ancestors come from abroad. Many of the African ancestors many of the Africans in this country descend from slave traders. They already have wealth position coming into the country. You see what they do to poor Blacks. They turn their asses around. Get back on your raft and get back to your country. Or they horsewhip them like they did down at the border, you see. While allowing Hispanics to come into the country. Okay? So don't fall for the grift, family. That HR 40 is empty, and we are going to have to neutralize it and stop it. They've only got as many signatures because those senators who signed on in the House of Reps, I don't even think it's the senators, I think it's the reps. House of Reps is working this through. They're trying to get enough signatures, and they're very close, so they can get an executive order signed by segregationist in chief Jim Crow Joe. Because this will never pass the Senate. White folks don't want to pay us, let alone Africans and Caribbeans who had no injury. But for the injury, they imported into the country to take on. And it ain't our fault our countries go over there and disrupt everything they got going on, because it is their goal to bring them in. Not the Black ones necessarily, but they get position over us too. They weaponize their accents. They weaponize where they're from. They weaponize their names to get position over freedmen in the workplace. You see, we can't hide behind our slave owners' last names. The immigrants and white folks who have all the social capital at those hiring tables know exactly who I am when I tell them my name. They know exactly who I am when I speak. And this is how they're locking us out and setting us up for ethno-genocide. So don't fall for the grifts called mulatto, BIPOC, colored, Negro, people of color, Black and African American. Don't fall for all that. They ain't talk about you. Diverse communities, oppressed communities. All this kind of nonsense means immigrants, not you. Don't fall for it, family. Let's keep scrolling because we'll be back from lunch in a second. I don't even know. Folks need to avoid the greetings. Yeah, we already went over that. Okay, there was one other thing I wanted to speak on before I jump. Let's see here. Shanna Kim. If there's a possible conflict of interest with the Grills and Narcan and Cobra connection now. I know she heard what the brother was saying about them. Oh, yes, Shanna Kim. I will be addressing it in my public comments tomorrow. I'm taking their asses to task. You don't want to miss the show, family. It's going to be epic. So I was talking about how over I was, this black and brown thing, this black-brown thing, everything these witnesses were referring to, they always have to include the brown. Well, it ain't Freedman's fault that this government decided to weaponize them against us to make us eat this L on the bottom of the Titanic as the anchor, to ethnogenocide us, to neutralize us economically, to give Hispanics a slight advantage over us so they can starve us out, giving away our reparations to them, all the while making them slightly better than Freedmen. So I have no energy to expend on what's happening with brown people who stole their way into the country illegally, whom the government is helping to empower with our reparations and our vote. That's what the Voting Rights Act is all about. It ain't got nothing to do with protecting Black votes. We came out in droves to vote for Obama, okay, who's instrumental in how we got here. When the bottom fell out of the real estate market, he chose to bail out Wall Street and the banks. We lost over 50% of our wealth then, and the pandemic is designed to wipe us completely off the monopoly board. Don't sleep. Compliment to the Democrats. So I am over them constantly tying and tethering our justice claim to that of brown people or the African or the Caribbean immigrant. I don't give a damn. Not my monkey, not my circus. They are clearly in a better wealth position than we are. They got all the jobs and their median incomes about 10,000 greater than ours down here in California. They own all the businesses in our communities. So miss me with it. All this black-brown talk. That's usually a setup to give them reparations. Because now that we've made it relevant, everybody's got a claim. And one last comment I want to make is about Wells Fargo Bank. When the senator was speaking on how he was hired at IBM, and they gave him the shittiest territories while setting up his white counterparts in the most illustrious communities of Beverly Hills. I shared in the chat where Wells Fargo Bank did the same thing to me and other freedmen before they totally got rid of us and replaced our jobs with immigrants after partnering with Wachovia Bank. They gave us the shittiest territories. And when you finally build up the market, they want to give that away to immigrants. This is what happened to me. I'm speaking from a true story. I build up the entire market called Long Beach from scratch. And when I went out on maternity leave, they gave it to a Hispanic woman. Okay? They gave my market to a Hispanic woman and punished me for becoming a mother. So by the time I came off maternity leave, I was relegated to the hood where they didn't even have the credit scores to qualify for the product and the services I provided through Wells Fargo. This trick went on to trick them out of a long-term disability claim, claiming she strained her back when she picked up her briefcase while inside one of the branches. That's the only way I got my market back. God as my benefactor, God as my sponsor. Because they set me up to be terminated. Because what they do is they put you in the worst distressed markets that can't qualify for your products or service, but they expect you to produce as if you were in Beverly Hills. This is the not so new slavery that goes on in corporate that nobody wants to talk about. Oh, I'm going to talk about it though, you see. I'm going to talk about it. Then they replaced all of us from tellers all the way up and through upper level management with immigrants. They coached the immigrants to rob the customers. Then they fired those immigrants, 5,500 to be exact, and gave John Stump, who was the CEO at the time, a $158 million golden parachute. That's freedman life in this country. And I'm not alone. It's not isolated. Oh, Lord, have mercy. So, you know, family, this is going, y'all might as well buckle up, buttercups. Y'all might as well buckle up, buttercups, because it's going to be a long ride to getting the justice we're due on the state and federal levels. And not only, the fight don't end once we procure it. The fight will continue into perpetuity. Because as soon as we achieve it, all these other groups are going to be crowbarring their way into how they can get access to it. You go have more $5 whites, more $5 white freedmen, more $5 Asian freedmen, more $5 Hispanic freedmen, more $5 Native American freedmen than the law should allow. If we don't keep a secure gate around the reparations we procure exclusively for freedmen. And with that being said, family, let me see here. I want to make sure I'm not missing nothing. While I was side-eyeing Holder last year, and TYSM and Shanna Kim for schooling me on the NARC members that head up this task force. Oh, yes. Rep says, preach, Angela. You know it. You know it. Y'all know I'm the big mouth from Fox Soul. Y'all know it. I bought that fire to Fox Soul. I was turned a little bit down because, you know, I was shocking folks. Hair was standing on everybody's arms and bald heads. But I bring the TI roof. I tell it like it TI is. Turned down for what? Freedmen's very lives are on the line. We cannot afford to give in, up, or out. With that being said, family, the light of God surrounds us. If I don't see you back this afternoon, let me pray out the first half. The light of God surrounds us, family. The love of God enfolds us. Okay? The power of God protects us in the presence of God, watches over us wherever freedmen and its allies are, God truly is, because family, you are the face of God. You are the voice of God. You are the body temple of the Spirit of the living God. I hope you come back with me. Part 2 is firing up in about 10 minutes. I'm going to intro that show, shut this down, intro that. If I don't see you back, make sure you watch the archive. Know that I love you black and that I love you so strong. And I am forever wishing you, family, freedmen, peace, love, and reparations, family. Yes, I am. Thank you for tuning in.